And we are just waiting for Mr. Snyder to join us. I see Mr. Gustafson is with us.
Hi, Celeste.
Hello. And Cindy, we are broadcasting audio on the live feed, but not video.
All right, thank you.
And everybody, we are broadcasting.
And Michael's here on standby for video as soon as our last council member is able to join. Which is coming in now.
Hi, Mr. Snyder. We're getting ready to start the meeting. Would you like to check your audio and video before we start?
Sure. Hi.
Hello. I don't see you, but I hear you.
A lot of people.
A lot of people. Oh, I see you now. Okay,
Yep.
You're all set.
We good to go? All right, Celeste, the video is on. If you could confirm when you have video, and then Mayor, when you're ready, I'm glad to read the notice and do roll call.
All right. Whenever you all are ready, I'm ready.
Just waiting for the stream to catch up.
Sorry for the delay. I'm still not seeing any video on the feed.
All right. I'm going to just get a touch of water. I'll be right back. So.
Okay. And Cindy, we still do not have a video feed. We have only audio.
Thank you. We'll check on that.
And to anybody tuning in, we're just having some technical difficulties, but we will be starting shortly.
We have video.
Okay, and as soon as the mayor is ready, we will begin the meeting.
Are you ready to go?
Yes, we are, Mayor.
All right. Well, welcome to the August 2nd, 2021 work session of the Falls Church City Council. Sorry for the short delay in getting started, but welcome you all. And thank you for joining us. Ms. Mester, would you like to read the meeting notice?
Yes, Mayor, certainly. The meeting for which this agenda has been posted will be held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, as well as state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operations during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council and other boards will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and members of the public can view the meeting at www.fallschurchva/council meetings, as well as on FCC TV, Cox Station 11, RCN 2, Verizon 35. Council work sessions are conducted to allow council members to discuss upcoming legislation and policy issues. The public is not generally invited to speak. However, public comment may be sent to cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov, and all comments are provided in full to the council members and will be summarized at the next regular city council meeting. And for roll call, Ms. Connolly?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Sean Siscott?
Here.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And again, welcome to everyone. Thanks for you all for joining. We do have a really busy agenda tonight, so I would just ask everyone to keep that in mind. And let's work as expeditiously as we can to get through things. Let's go ahead and get on our first item, which is our joint session with the CACT, Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation. I see Mr. Gustafson, and I don't know if there are other folks as well. Hi from CACT, but welcome and thank you for joining us and for the great work you guys do. You all do. Is there anyone joining you tonight, Dave?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know we are, I'm not seeing a full list here. I know we have at least Andrew Olison and a few other members of the CACT were planning to attend. And I believe our Vice Chair, Jason Garman, will be joining us soon if he's not on already. But yeah, we can go ahead and get started.
Sure, and as people join, feel free to introduce them, or you can introduce yourselves. We'd love to, put names and faces together and speak directly with you about your concerns and comments and questions and the like, so that we can all work together. But please proceed, Dave.
Great. Well, thank you. We appreciate you having us and agreeing to a work session. We know you're busy. We know you have a big agenda tonight and always. So yes, again, I'm Dave Gustafson, the new chair of the CACT. We also have Vice Chair Jason Garman, Arthur Agan, Sean Bacon, Doug Devereaux, Jess Hagenbart, and Andrew Olison as our members. Our staff liaison is Jeff Sykes, and our council liaison is Dave Snyder, and our planning commission liaison is Melissa Keats. When I came before you in February, CACT was rebuilding. We had just lost 4 members in 2 months, and we were reeling a bit. Thanks to the council's appointments committee, we have 4 great new members. We have another vacancy that's coming up soon. Doug Devereaux has given notice that he's going to be resigning soon. So we're going to have another opportunity for someone who's interested in transportation issues to join CACT. In February, with the annual report to council, I reported that our goals are updating the neighborhood traffic calming program, meeting with the ESC to discuss biking and walking issues, look at council's work plans through the equity lens, and then also establishing a sidewalk program and possible Vision Zero program. So far this year, we have reported out on the equity concerns regarding the many transportation issues that are in council's work plan for the next 2 years. We've also sent recommendations for a sidewalk and accessibility program that's in the packet tonight. We had a joint meeting with the ESC in February, I believe, where we looked at some concerns about bike safety in the city. The 2 large themes that came out of that were safely getting bicyclists to the middle and high school, and also building protected bike lanes. So those are aligned with council's work plans. The vice mayor has done a great job getting things started with the Safe Routes to Schools working group, and I'm excited. I'm really pleased with everything that's coming out of that so far. But we've seen that there are many issues related to that, and given how dynamic the construction situation is over at that end of town, we're going to have to keep a close eye on pedestrian and cyclist safety issues for the next few years until we can create some sort of more permanent fix to be able to improve the pedestrian and cyclist safety. Tonight, I wanted to talk a bit about bike safety to the schools, adding bike lanes, adding sidewalks, and also how we can create more win-win-win projects like the greening Lincoln Avenue proposal, where there's something for everyone in that. So I wanted to start with bike lanes. If we could take a look at the bike lane. Could we look at the other attachment? Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Where would you like me to go, Dave? And I'll scroll to.
Yeah, if you could just look at the prioritized safe routes to schools. Actually, let's scroll down to the to that section. I believe it's the top of page 2. Let's see. Yeah, recent there. Evaluations and recommendations for safer bike routes to middle and high schools. One of our new members, Andrew Olson, who's here with us tonight, and I see we have our vice chair, Jason Garman, here, put together a great set of recommendations where he went out and looked at the many routes in the Giant or the Birch and Broad area to look at what's through the idea of how a 12-year-old could safely get across that busy intersection. And so this has come up in the Safe Routes to Schools working group that the vice mayor is leading. We would also recommend if staff could also be involved with taking a closer look at that intersection and what can be done temporarily as part to supplement that effort to help get kids and parents and staff safely across that intersection. And it might be that if there are some discussions that could happen with some of the property owners, I know that that's not an easy task. That's a big ask, but we think that it's something that is important enough to merit some discussions about, possibly getting some sort of temporary agreement with one of those property owners to be able to encourage more walking and biking to school. But it's a bit dicey, as we've seen, as with the cyclist who was struck on Bike and Walk to School Day, who is not affiliated with the schools but happened right next to the schools, and we know that many students had witnessed that as well. Related to that, if we could scroll down to the protected bike lanes. So CACT had aligned its work in the early part of this year to match up with what's in council's work plan. So council had a section in the work plan about constructing at least 1 mile of protected bike lanes in the city. I know that's not an easy feat necessarily, but we would like to encourage you to prioritize that because there's plenty of infrastructure for motor vehicles, but the city is severely lacking in terms of infrastructure that's dedicated to pedestrians and cyclists. And I know we have our new census numbers coming out in a month or two, but our population's up at least 40% in the last 20 years. And so we want to make sure that people can safely get around town. So we think that Park Avenue is a great place that would be a great east-west avenue for cyclists and more pedestrians. And we think that the safer that pedestrians can feel and the safer that cyclists can feel, the more trips they're willing to take through those means of transit. But for right now, there's just been too much prioritization for the efficient movement of motor vehicles. And we think that also through the sense of equity, that it's better to use these shared public spaces and sort of tilt them a bit more toward moving cyclists and pedestrians safely through town. And so we would encourage you to do that. And Andrew also did a great job with CACT input in terms of recommending some places where we could link some infrastructure that does exist for cyclists in terms of building protected bike lanes, hopefully in the not too distant future. And then moving down to number 3, the guiding principles for the neighborhood sidewalk and accessibility programs. We all know that the city needs more sidewalks. We applaud what council and city staff have done in terms of adding to, creating missing links. We're starting to see that soon with the Great Falls and Little Falls neighborhood traffic calming project that is going to be built in the next month or two. That's going to add a couple of missing links, and also add some more, add some more infrastructure to make pedestrians feel safer in a very well-trodden part of town. And so, in Mobility for All Modes, the in-council work plan had called for some guidelines for a sidewalk program and a program to make the city more aligned with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we put together some recommendations for how such a program could be stood up and administered. And so we're happy to discuss those with you at your convenience. And then, much like council's work plan, there are many transportation issues that are happening this time of year. And so we have, so this is just a list of some of the things that we're keeping an eye on. A few of the top ones that we're going to be discussing in the not too distant future is coming out of Richmond, our new ability to be able to possibly lower the speed limit in some areas to 20 or even 15 miles an hour. And where we would want to do that, what we would want to, and how we would want to make those decisions and what's involved with that. So we're also keeping an eye on what other municipalities are doing with that. We're also interested in the ability to add speed cameras to school zones. I know Councilman Snyder has often brought us up to speed with some of the developments on that before that was enacted. Also, we'll be watching the BRT planning efforts and weighing in on that as appropriate. And then, of course, we'll just be keeping an eye on many development issues that are happening. So those are many transportation issues that are going on. I know you have a busy schedule, and I want to leave plenty of time for discussion. I think I will just leave it there for now, but we appreciate the opportunity for all of you having us here. I'm pleased to report that we have an impressive new group of CACT members who are very energized and passionate and have jumped right in and are getting up to speed and have brought exciting new perspectives and experience to our group. And so I'm excited about what we can do in the next year, and we're eager to support council and city staff however we can the best. And so put us to work. We're happy to work with you and eager to get started. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, it looks like you have been at work and working pretty hard, because a lot of good stuff in your recommendations. A lot of things that I think are very intuitive, but still need to be done. So I'm going to open it up to questions and comments. I know there probably are plenty, but a lot of good stuff here. Letty?
Thank you. Thanks, Dave, and the rest of the CACT for joining us. I actually just got back from a Girl Scouts meeting. They had invited me to talk about safe routes to school. And so clearly, I think that just reaffirms the importance of ped and bike safety, and really that mobility at all modes really is important to our entire community and clearly with our students. So thank you for all your hard work. I wanted to hone in on the two specific recommendations because it especially relates to things in our work plan already. So on protected bike lanes, and actually these are more questions directed at Wyatt and the rest of staff. So we're protected bike lanes. Given that's already on the City Council work plan, this is something that we've aspired to do. The CACT has done their part and they've identified 7 specific routes. Are there opportunities for us to sync with upcoming paving projects or other projects where we can actually get going with implementation? And if so, do you need funding for that? So that's kind of my first question.
So we do implement the new bike facilities when we do a repaving. And, one of the reasons for that is applying paint to old pavement usually doesn't last very long. We've experienced that in the past, and that's why the two are linked. And so it does get phased in over time. I think that's the immediate answer. I could touch base with Public Works just to report back to council on our proposed schedule to implement the 7 recommendations by the CACT. I know they were at the table with planning staff and the CACT when this discussion occurred.
Terrific. I think getting a schedule and some commitments would be helpful, and especially as we look at where we need to allocate budget dollars. I think we're all happy to put dollars against these things. So thank you. Second, along the same lines is sidewalks. So for everyone who hasn't looked at the link on, I think it's embedded in your recommendation to us. I really like, Dave, what you guys did around prioritization framework and how to think about sidewalks, because we have so many parts of the city that could use sidewalks and there's missing links. And I know staff's been working on some sort of missing links inventory. So again, similar to my question about bike lanes, how do we take that inventory if it's done and actually start prioritizing and putting our annual budget, which we started putting aside money this year, and actually start building sidewalks? Because that is, I would say, next to development, probably the second most frequent topic I get is when are we going to get a sidewalk here? When are we going to get a sidewalk there? So it generally gets a lot of community interest. And so I'd love to know, again, commitments, dollars, what do you need from us to kind of start getting to those sidewalks?
And was that question directed to staff as well?
Yes. And also requests for council. If there are things that you want the CACT or you need council to make appropriations, I think this is a great place to discuss.
So we are going to send out an email to council with our proposed use of the $180,000 for sidewalk missing links this fiscal year, and we look forward to council feedback on that list. The next area of discussion will be in terms of other sources of funding to accelerate that, but that's the immediate task before us, is to identify the use of this year's appropriation, which is 100, is the figure I just noted.
That's great news. And that's gone through the CACT's kind of prioritization framework of, they've given their input on which sidewalk should be tackled first.
It's gone through a staff review that included the CACT prioritization. I will confirm that, though, again, before we send that memo out. I believe that is the case, but I'll reconfirm that before we send it out.
Great. I don't want to slow down the work, but I do feel like because the CACT was so thoughtful in putting together kind of prioritization framework for it, that let's make sure they have a chance to review too. Thank you. Nice work and good to see you all.
Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thanks, Mayor Charter, and thank you, Dave, for all that work there in the past year, especially as everyone's been home more often with COVID. There have been a lot more walkers and bikers out there mixing with traffic, so I do appreciate this. I'd like the idea of the 15 to 20 mile per hour speed limits, so I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about all that. The first thing you mentioned was the Safe Routes to School group, and I will say that I've been working on this committee wearing my Falls Church City Public School employee hat and working with a great group of CACT members, community members, city staff, as well as school staff to try to come up with some ways to make getting to school safer, both at Oak Street Elementary School, because we're replacing the TJ Tiger Trail with the newly named Oak Street Elementary Trail as Oak Street Elementary Tiger Trail, as well as getting kids back and forth from the secondary campus. And there are so many little things that go into making a big plan. One of those is just that, you know, the intersection of Haycock and Broad is in Fairfax County. So our police and our crossing guards aren't able to protect that intersection the same way they are able to protect the roads that are in Falls Church. So that one has been a bit of a puzzle, and we're really working on starting to educate students and all that they need to stay on the crosswalk and walk with the crossing guards. But something that came up as we were working with Oak Street Elementary School, and it relates to sidewalks and it relates to equity. And I'm just wondering if this is something that could be fast tracked, which is as we looked at the Tiger Trail, which has been around since 2004, we noticed that there are two streets in the city, Irving and Kent, which come out of the Fields Apartments towards Parker Avenue. And neither of those streets have appropriate sidewalks to get kids to school. So kids walk to school on those roads. And I think a lot of kids and parents walk and bike to get to Oak Street Elementary School. But there really isn't that safe connection. And I know there's going to be a master park change over there on, I think it's Kent Street, related to Berman Park. But I do think this is a much more urgent problem, and I'm wondering if that's something that we as a city can fast track and try to get done as soon as possible, so that there is at least one sidewalk coming down either Irving, probably Irving would be a better choice, to connect with the sidewalk on Parker.
So as you noted on the Berman Park project, which we have grant dollars for, that does include sidewalk connections down to the trail from the Ellison Street, from the Fields Apartments. So that is in the plan for Kent Street. We'll get feedback on that from the citizens, from the residents who live there. Irving Street is a bit of a tougher situation with respect to right-of-way. So I think in terms of fast-tracking it, I need to get back with Public Works just in terms of what they encountered when they did the survey. And whenever there's right-of-way acquisition, that does, that slows things down. So we're gathering the facts on the Irving Street connection, and we'll get that back to the whole team that's considering safe routes to school.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Wyatt.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yeah. Hey, Wyatt, can you remind me again where sidewalks stand in terms of applicability for ARPA funding?
It's under review. When we get to the ARPA budget item later on tonight, we do have some items relating to traffic calming under the sort of the umbrella idea that more people are out walking, and nationally there has been an increase in fatalities on the highways and serious accidents on streets during COVID. Cindy, just briefly, what's your view of sidewalks and their eligibility for ARPA?
For category C, which is the revenue loss category, they would clearly be eligible. That is the one, however, as we've discussed, where we don't have revenue loss right now, so that's not an option for the city. So what we're looking at is category C, which is the public health component, and looking at some of the FAQs and interpretations coming out of the U.S. Treasury to see if we can tie that point that Mr. Shields made about, because of the pandemic, more people are at home, walking outdoors healthier. There has been some FAQ speaking to maintenance of parks because they're more worn because they're being used. So I'm looking at that for an interpretation for perilness, but we're still investigating it. So I hope at the time we can do a sort of part 2 BA and allocations past this immediate, we'll have that more firmed. The U.S. Treasury has closed their public comment period, and so we're waiting for the final rules to be issued, and that may help us clarify it as well.
Okay. Yeah, my recollection was that it qualified, and I thought I recalled some language and recommendation coming out of some of our various associations talking about sidewalk programs. Dave, I've said this before, and I may sound like a broken record every time you guys come in front of us, but I truly believe that CACT is as probably one of the more critical missions right now, especially in the context of all the development that we're doing in town. And further to the comments, I think that a few of us made a few weeks ago as it relates to ARPA funding, sidewalks, crosswalks, transportation issues, things that are infrastructure related, and you could consider protected bike lanes one of those, is one of those investments that we can make in the community that has very, very long-term beneficial effects, whether it's health related or it's simply getting from point A to point B. But in order for us to truly recognize the vision, I think that most of us share in terms of this walkable, vibrant community, which is certainly, the reason that we're looking at connectivity between these larger mixed-use developments. It is critically important for us to spend the money to make it safe to walk around and provide the physical infrastructure to do that. And so you guys have my full support when it comes to these infrastructure related spend, especially that's going to allow people more efficient and effective way to get from one project to the next. I mean, we're only 2 square miles here, and you can literally walk to every single project within a reasonable amount of time if you've got the energy and time to do it. So I am all for it, and I would certainly advocate us spending some of our ARPA funding where it's allowed to check off the box on whether it's missing sidewalks, new sidewalks, expanded sidewalks, protected bike lanes, anything from an infrastructure perspective that's going to be there for a while. So thank you guys for the work that you've done. Again, I think it's absolutely critical, especially in the context of larger comprehensive planning in the city. And I really appreciate all the detailed review and report and recommendations that you guys have been providing. So thank you, Dave.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. I think this is just about the best CACT that I can recall in terms of the work that you do. We've always been very lucky with good leadership of CACT, but the quality of work is really extraordinary. And there are 2 points of clarification that other council members have made very good points. One of them is, Chair Gustafson, when you use the term protected bike lane, I think you mean something more than paint on the pavement, don't you, with that?
Yeah, that's a good point, Councilman Snyder. Yeah, so we actually, it would probably be better if I threw that to Andrew Olson if he's available.
I can jump in. Yeah, I think if you the short answer is yes. The kind of nomenclature would be a bike lane is just a strip of paint on the road, and a protected bike lane is the step up from that, which is some sort of physical barrier between cyclists and cars. And it's this idea. I think the 2 things one thing I've learned in the last year that I really appreciated was if you wouldn't feel comfortable walking in that space, why should you feel comfortable on a bike, right? There's nothing more protecting you from getting hit by a car on a bike than there is walking. And so would you feel comfortable walking down the side of a street in a certain place? If not, then that's probably not really a place where just a strip of paint for a bike lane is enough. And the sort of bicycle literature over the past couple of years, and a lot of cities have made this journey of we just need to put paint down. That doesn't actually encourage more people to go ride their bikes because, maybe for me, was a big bike guy and will kind of ride anywhere. That might encourage me to ride more, but it's not going to get my family out there. It's not going to make someone feel really comfortable. And so I think it's just shifting in the people who think about this stuff for their day jobs is really that you need some sort of physical protection. And so in DC, you'll see things like, and in Arlington, right, the plastic bollards is the cheap and easy way to do it. And you move up from there to, some concrete, some pavers, all the way into what is almost a trail, but next to the street.
Okay, thanks for that. I think that's very important to make a note of. The second thing is in terms of building sidewalks. A lot of places it's suitable to actually build the sidewalk into the street. And so you're not dealing with a right-of-way, in other words, having to acquire right-of-way or moving telephone poles or fire hydrants or, that kind of thing. So I would suggest a strong look at that as an option to get these sidewalks built that I think everyone wants built. And I think you've heard some good commitments for funding tonight. A third question really goes to the city manager in terms of how soon will we get the speed limit ordinance in front of us, and how do we move forward? We all know that setting a speed limit is one thing and enforcing it is another, and enforcement and education go along with that, and signage and everything else. But in my view, you need the basic law there as the foundation, and then you build the rest of the structure, including enforcement and education. So, Mr. City Manager, that and the radar in school zones. When do we expect we'll get to both of those?
So we do have a funding item in the ARPA allocation for a conversion for the street signs, which is an expensive item. But there is also some engineering requirements and a legal review requirement. And so we would take those together as a package, and we'll talk about the dollar amount for that later on tonight's agenda. The city attorney is reviewing kind of all of those procedures about that conversion right now. And so we will talk about scheduling it. I think we all hope that we could bring that to council this fall and then implement the signage and the enforcement. Be ready to go right after the council gives consideration to such an ordinance.
Great, thank you very much. And again, thank you to all the members of the CACT, an extraordinary amount of work. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Mester, and we need to wind up this conversation because we have a very busy evening. Ms. Mester?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to share for council and the CACT that there is a study ongoing from the last General Assembly on crosswalks. There was a poorly written bill last year that we were able to get sent to study. And so today the staff team has done a detailed review of the comments that came out of that first working group meeting. And we'll be having that to share with both the legislative committee, and we can send it to the CACT because it's very much aligned with the discussion we're having today on sidewalks and pedestrians, the crosswalks and how they're marked and so forth, and maintaining local control is pretty important as well. So I just wanted to highlight that for council as another thing on the CACT's monitoring list.
All right, thank you. And I guess I'll just conclude with, I think there's a lot of great stuff here. This is the kind of projects I'd like to support, particularly with ARPA money, the extent it's able to be done. I view this as an investment in our community that'll pay dividends for years and years, and that will attract more businesses and economic development, and allow for a more efficient transportation network here in the city for our residents and our businesses and the like, and our children. So anyway, I'm all for it. I'd like to find ways to get these projects done as quickly as possible. But I'll give you the final word, Dave. But again, thank you all for coming out and the great work you all are doing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, council members and staff. Yeah, just a couple last points to leave you with. We are grateful that you all are taking so many transportation issues into consideration with the ARPA funds and CIP and sort of day-to-day work. I know listening to a lot of council meetings in the last couple of years for transportation stormwater matters, we know I'm in agreement with a lot of the concerns on council in terms of more communication, the better. And I think signs are a good way to communicate that. So I think if there's one of our members, Art, had raised the point that if we could have more signage, especially if we're going to be changing speed limits in certain areas, that would be helpful to have. And then I know Vice Mayor Connolly has been out there as part of the Safe Routes to Schools group looking for signage placement as well. And she was out driving around for hours and hours as part of the Oak Street Trail. And so we're grateful for her work on that as well. And then another thing, and just for consideration, either through ARPA or just kind of day-to-day work, is we would like to just encourage council to allocate more money for paint and signage and bollards and things that are temporary, because we've all seen that the crosswalks can deteriorate pretty quickly, and we think that as that happens, there's less respect for them. So we think if we can allocate more money to touch those up more often, that those are cheaper to touch up every few years rather than having to repave and then only putting things down when we have fresh pavement. So and then I would also say, just with Arlington went forward with the Vision Zero plan earlier this year. So we would encourage you to keep an eye on that. We will be doing that. And we've also seen that in Arlington that more than half of the fatalities that they've had this year have had pedestrians involved. And then with Fairfax, there have been 8 pedestrian fatalities so far. So there's some bad things that have happened with pedestrian and cyclist safety all around us. And, knock on wood, hopefully it doesn't happen around us. But the more that we can do to improve the safety now, it's going to pay dividends well into the future, as the mayor said. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing more from you and working closely in the future with you as well. So thanks very much. And let's move on to the next item, which is the West Falls Church project. We know there's a lot of subcomponents to that, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Shields, and ask that you introduce them, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. So we do have a good number of subcomponents, as you referenced, to the West Falls Church project, and there are 6 to be precise. And let me just review, list them so those that are following this meeting understand how all these will be considered together tonight. We have the resolution to grant a special exception entitlement for mixed-use development. That's the basic land entitlements. We have the resolution to grant a special exception site plan, the SESP. That is the SEE and the SESP are very tightly linked together. The third item is the ordinance to create and establish the West Falls Community Development Authority. The fourth item is the resolution approving the acquisition of approximately 0.33 acres, or 1/3 of an acre, from the school board, and that is the to facilitate the Phase 2 office building, which we've been discussing. Item 5 is listed as C here, and that is a resolution to authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement with Fairfax County to determine that the proposed development for the high school property complies with the 2014 voluntary boundary adjustment agreement. And we do ask for the council to consider a vote on that item tonight at work session, which is something that we don't often do, but in order to have that agreement into effect prior to August 9th, I think would be helpful. And so that's a recommendation, but the council can make that determination as to taking that action tonight or on August 9th next week. And then the last item relating to West Falls is a resolution to approve a second amendment to the comprehensive agreement with respect to what is covered in the SEE amendment, which is the increase of 35,000 square feet for the senior component. That's the substance of the change to the comprehensive agreement. So those are the 6 items. We will start off with the first two, the SEE amendment and the SESP, and consider them together. Paul Stoddard will be providing our staff report for this item. Carly Aubrey is typically our staff lead on this, and she is on a well-deserved vacation tonight. So Paul will hit some of the highlights of items for the council's awareness. Really, the purpose of the discussion for all these items is for council to provide final review and final direction to staff and anticipation of final consideration formally on August 9th, with the one exception of the agreement with Fairfax County, for which we're asking action tonight. Following Paul Stoddard's staff presentation, the development team of Falls Church Gateway Partners is on this call, and they have about 8 slides to go over just to review changes that they have made in the last weeks in response to comments they've received from the City Council and from the Planning Commission. Let me start first with Mr. Stoddard's update for the City Council, and then we would go to the development team for their update. Mr. Stoddard?
Before we get to Mr. Stoddard, the development team, I guess I would just say, as far as your presentations, we have heard numerous ones from both the developer and staff on this project. And so I would ask that you confine your remarks to changes that have occurred over just the past several weeks only, and to keep them brief as we have a very busy evening tonight. So with that, Mr. Stoddard, welcome.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council. And yeah, it is a doozy of a report. It's 48 pages, but I focused my remarks just on the recent materials. So I'll start with the request section, line item 4. As Wyatt laid out, this is scheduled to be council's last work session prior to final consideration next Monday at your regular meeting. On the 2 legislative items, the 2 resolutions, one is the amendment to the SEE, Special Exception Entitlement, and then the other is the approval of the SESP, Special Exception Site Plan. I'm going to jump to line 65. I'll skip past the table of contents into the recommendation. And this is staff's request that council provide direction to the applicant as well as staff on these 3 items highlighted here. First is the applicant's request for additional square footage in the senior housing building, which I'll provide more detail in a little bit. Second is final review of the voluntary concessions, including coordination with construction of the school site, as well as the affordable housing contributions. And then third is the request for additional commercial uses that are not permitted by right in the B2 zoning district. The background section, I'm not going to step through all this, but it does provide the history of this project going back to the first SEE approval in 2019, submission of the SESP in June of 2020, that's on line 89. Second submission on line 97 in January of 2021, and then focused discussions by council during the summer of 2021. And just the reason for stating that here is just to mention to the community watching that this has obviously been under consideration by council for some time and in great detail. So I'm going to focus now on those 3 items I highlighted in the staff recommendation section. First, I need to jump to line 152, which is the senior housing component. There on line 155 and 156, it is a request of an additional 35,000 gross square feet within the building to a total maximum of 260,000 gross square feet. Line 164, the increase in square footage would result in an additional floor from 14 to 15 stories. That height is consistent with what's allowable under the zoning ordinance, as well as what was in the original SEE approval in 2019. The item has been referred out to both the school board as well as the planning commission. You can see on line 176, school board reviewed it at their July 13th meeting, talked about shadow studies, fiscal impact. I apologize, cleaning is happening in the building. If there's any trouble hearing me, let me know. And then 181, line 181, Planning Commission reviewed in a work session last week, and they'll take, 2 weeks ago, and they'll take final action at their meeting this Wednesday. Similar to the school board, they talked about fiscal impact as well as possible shadow study impacts. Let's see, line 187, this is the second item I highlighted. This is affordable housing. And just to provide history here, that there has been, going back to the 2018 request for detailed proposals issued by the city, an expectation that there'd be a baseline affordability in the project of 6% of the units available at 60% AMI, area median income. The voluntary concessions in the 2019 SEE approval provided that baseline as well as an allowance for flexibility. If you jump to the tables at the top of the next page, you'll see staff's recommendation for how to utilize that flexibility. There are 2 tables here. It's a lot of numbers. The things to focus on are really the columns with blue numbers. So the top table is the baseline. You've got 6% of the units, and then if you go over to the 2 more blue columns to the right, AMI is there at 60%, so that's the baseline scenario. The staff recommendation, and this is led by the city's Housing and Human Services staff, is to flex the unit mix. You can see an adjustment in the unit mix, and that's done to hold on to the larger format units, the 2-bedroom units, while getting those housing units available to households with lower AMI. You can see the AMIs drop as low as 40%. That's the column on the right. And so that is the staff recommendation for using that flexibility.
Mr. Stoddard, could I just interrupt you for a second? I'm sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
It's, as far as the ADUs go, it's my understanding the city council or the city doesn't need to make a decision at this point at the time of approval. Is that correct?
I think we can double check that in the VCs, but I think as written in the VCs, the expectation is that it's done at time of council action next Monday.
Is that accurate, Mr. Shields or Ms. McCroskey?
So we were talking about this before the meeting. In the SEE entitlements or the voluntary concessions, it does say that that decision would be made at SESP. And so, I'd just share that point of information. In terms of if it were not made at the SESP, how it would be made by the city council, presumably we'd have to bring back a separate resolution to have the council make that decision. I guess the short answer is we had been anticipating that the decision would be made at SESP.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption.
Not at all. The other item related to affordability is on line 288. and it's staff's recommendation that a cash in lieu option be used for the senior housing component. And there that works out to a dollar amount of, oh, there it is on line 289, a dollar amount of approximately $228,000 annually, plus a 3% annual escalation. Third item is the, oh, sorry for rustling papers. Third item is the requested commercial uses in the project, and that discussion begins on line 1402. It's page 33 of the staff report. So the B2 zoning district is a little bit more restrictive than other commercial districts in the city. However, there's an allowance within the special revitalization district that if requested by the developer and the council makes a finding, I'm sorry, line 1407. And the council makes a finding that the requested additional uses contribute to the overall goals of the district as well as the vibrancy of the area, that council can allow additional uses and provide restrictions for those uses. So this is a table. The requested uses is the column on the left. Middle column is the applicant's justification for including them, which largely staff has found to be supportive of the goals of the district. The column on the right is staff's recommendation for either additional restrictions on those uses or clarifications of those issues. Staff had a positive phone call with the applicant this afternoon on getting clarity and restrictions in place, and staff would prepare those restrictions and include them in the legislation for your final consideration next week. And of course, since this is a work session, happy to answer any questions on this or any other items in the staff report. But that actually concludes my report, and I'm happy to open it up to questions.
All right, let's move on before we get to questions and hear the developer's presentation. It looks like we have several representatives of the developer. I'm not sure who intends to speak, but welcome to you all, and please go ahead and get started with your presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Robin Betterell. I'm part of the Falls Church Gateway Partners, specifically representing Hoffman and Associates tonight. My colleague Evan Goldman is also on the line, but we were told to be brief tonight, so I got picked to give tonight's presentation. Just kidding, Evan. You know, I'll try to be very brief and you know, keep things professional and stop dissing on my colleague. But overall, I just want to say, you know, we're really happy to be the city's partner on this great project. I know it has been a long and at sometimes bumpy road for us, but I really do believe that if we can work together to get through this next milestone next week, we will be on track to start this project in less than a year's time. And we'll get to that schedule at the end of this quick presentation. So if you go to the next slide, we're just including a few new views that we've been working on with our rendering company, specifically to go into our financing package, which we are preparing right now to go out to the market. So again, I will remind everyone that we are scheduled to break ground in early first quarter of 2021. And so the moment is upon us, and we are out there starting to talk to folks and working with our debt and equity teams. This is a view, obviously, within the Commons. So I think, you know, still showing all of the great features that were shown to this council and the city at the response to the RFP, which is this dynamic, world-class transit-oriented development with this fantastic central boulevard, including a park space, all of the discussion of the previous item on the safe routes to school and multimodal transportation. All of that is displayed in this development. Next slide, please. This is another just example of the quality of the development, as well as we wanted to sort of highlight the partnership that we've had with the city over these past 2.5 years as we've worked on this, almost 3 years now, actually, when you consider the original RFP timeline as part of it. One of the big comments that we heard early from the city was the importance of the intersection at Haycock and Route 7. We heard that comment. We originally envisioned the Anchor grocery store to be located right off the Commons. But after a lot of thought and internal debate, and in some cases against the better judgment of some of the retail experts on the team, we did decide to put the grocery store at that corner location. Again, just showing the city our commitment as partners, and understanding that this is not just our project, it is also the city's project. Next slide, please. And this is another view of that pedestrian connection from Haycock up to the Commons. Again, another area where I think we heard a lot of commentary from the city and really worked hard to make sure that this was the space that the city wanted to see. And again, talking about those safe routes to school, we heard many times from the school as well that this is a path traveled frequently by students now, even in the sort of unsafe condition that it is from the giant shopping center. And I think this new intersection with an actual signalized light, a pedestrian refuge out on Haycock Road is going to be a massive improvement to the conditions that are there today. Next slide, please. This is a sort of update. It does include a little bit more than the most recent changes, but I'll try to just hit the most recent changes per the mayor's request. I think we did a lot of work in design. Most of that is not new, so I will sort of let you go through that and skip over that. But probably the most recent changes are with respect to the affordable housing proffers on the project. The SEE approval that we received back in 2019 was very clear as the affordable housing baseline for the project, which was 6% of the residential units at 60% AMI. That included the senior living units, independent living units. Through negotiations and many meetings with Nancy Vincent and Dana Lewis, as well as other staff, we have come up with an alternative unit mix based on those staff's recommendations of the real need that they're seeing in the affordable housing space right now. And so we've created an alternative unit mix with deeper levels of affordability for certain unit types. And so the mix that we've created exactly matches the mix and percentages and unit types that were requested by Dana and Nancy and their team. And we were pleased to be able to do that. It's not, while it's hard to sort of calculate an exact value to that, you know, I think there is value there. We didn't, you know, there are all kinds of non-monetary, I will say, or not directly monetary issues related with housing affordability, deeper levels of affordability, and the surety of rent payment in some cases in that. And I think it's something that our companies collectively, EY and Hoffman, are very committed to, and we're pleased to be able to offer that. And in addition, our senior partner, who many of you now know is a new partner, because they were coming to this new with fresh eyes, was able to address the city's request for an annual payment in lieu of providing the units, the independent living units. And I have a slide to sort of review that with everyone, because I think it's been somewhat overlooked in our discussions previously. Finally, in terms of the new things that have come up over the last couple of weeks, we have had a lot of long discussions with the city manager, with the schools, and have agreed to make a $150,000 to $200,000 one-time payment to the schools to help them in the completion of their trapezoid parking lot, which is really the last piece to cap off a great project that they've done with Gilbane and complete that brand new high school that I know everyone is so proud of. Next slide, please. This is just to highlight again the baseline 6% mix that just reflects the apartment mix. You know, the distribution of units amongst types is just reflective of the overall mix, whereas on the bottom, the request was for 25% of the units at 40% AMI to be studios, 25% of the units at 50% AMI to be one bedrooms, 25% of the units to be at 55% AMI to be 2 bedrooms and the balance 2-bedroom den. So larger units at slightly higher levels of affordability. This even, in my mind, goes beyond what the VCs in the SEE said, which was that if we went to deeper levels of affordability, that we would also have some units that would flex up to 80% AMI to help balance out those deeper levels of affordability. Rather than push on that SEE, we really tried to meet the city where they were here and follow exactly the unit mix that Nancy and Dana had suggested. And I think they were fairly happy with the outcome there, as we gave them exactly what they asked for. Next slide, please. The senior housing payments, again, I think has been a somewhat overlooked proffer over these last few weeks. This is major for the city. The payment starts out at $228,412 in year 1 of the ground lease. It escalates at 3% annually, which is debatably slightly above market escalation factor for if you kind of equate this to an ongoing ground rent payment. The year 99 annual payment just for that year will be $4,137,000, and then the total nominal value of all of those payments over the course of the ground lease is $134.5 million. This is a massive benefit to the city. And while, yes, it is in lieu of providing the affordable units in the independent living, it's essentially equating, if you equate it to the 35,000 square foot request that's been made, roughly equates to around $186 per FAR foot. I know we're not working in FAR there, but just to give folks a metric, it's been asked many times by council, well, what is the city getting in exchange for that?
Let me ask this then, since you're bringing that point up. Mr. Shields, were they supposed to provide affordable housing in the senior component anyway, irrespective of the 35,000 square foot request they've made?
Yeah, so the original understanding has always been that in the independent living for the senior, that the sort of the basic rule of 6% at 60% AMI would be the standard. We were desirous to turn that into cash to avoid a situation where a resident of the independent would, as they go through the spectrum of care, as their needs evolve, would face eviction. And we've tried to struggle with this in other senior facilities, and we believe that cash subsidy is the best way to provide that continuity of care. So that is what we were trying to negotiate for in this process.
So this isn't for the 35,000 square feet. This is something that's been a requirement from day one, that they provide 6% housing there, and this is just a payment in lieu of that actual affordable housing within the senior component, correct?
That is correct. And that is the bottom line. I would just note, however, that we do have an outside real estate consultant, Ted Risher, who is helping us on this negotiation. And in this cash offer, it is essentially exactly what Ted had asked for, and what Ted had calculated was a fair proposal. So that is, that's why we're also bringing that as a recommendation by staff.
But a fair component or fair compensation
fair
for the commitment to make 6% affordable housing in the senior, not for any additional senior square footage, correct?
So it is a proxy for that earlier proffer.
Yes, so the 6% affordable housing, that is what at least our consultant considers, quote, fair value as a cash payment in lieu of actually providing those units, but it's not compensation for 35,000 square feet of additional senior housing. Is that right?
I think that's fair. I think we would say we think that's a good, fair representation, and a lot of these, so I think that's the bottom line.
All right. Well, let's keep going on your presentation. Thank you.
If I may just make a quick counterpoint to that, the payment in lieu is not something that we were required to do. It was a optionality. It was a request by the city. It was something that we had full ability to say no to. It is a substantial economic change to the deal that we were only able to agree to because we entered into negotiations with a new senior partner. I will remind everyone the previous senior partner was not able to continue to be in the deal. It was not working for them. This request came from the new partner, and as they were looking at the deal fresh and able to structure it again from jump, they were able to meet the city's request. Now, if
you don't want to make this cash payment, then maybe we should go back and consider just providing the affordable units in the senior component. I mean, I guess that's something we can ask the city manager to consider for next week's meeting, is just going ahead with the original deal as opposed to changing it to a cash payment.
That would certainly be fine with this senior provider providing 6% of the independent living units. This is what they've provided in our minds, and getting into conversations of value is always, there's many variables that affect value, I think, that can be debated. And so I think in their minds that would be perfectly fine. This was an attempt to meet the city and basically meet a request that was being made of the city. Understand that they were asking for something in return.
All right. Please continue with your presentation.
The final slide is just a simple timeline overview, just to remind everybody of where we are in space and time. Again, it's been a long journey to get here. We are very close to the finish line, and I say that as much as to commend everyone for all the hard work as to remind everyone that there's quite a bit that we need to do to get to that break ground date that is really right upon us. And so I would, again, thank everyone for all of their hard work, all of their comments. I feel like we have been, honest and operated with full transparency and integrity this whole time. And with that, as your partner, I will make a final request that we need to get this entitlement completed at next week's work session. It is imperative in terms of keeping the schedule that we have committed to and promised to the city. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much. All right, let's move on to council comments and questions. Does anyone on council have any questions or comments or requests? Mr. Snyder?
Thank you. My questions go to the finances. So can we go to the place where the money is laid out? We've seen the pictures. I want to see the money. So where in the package can you bring that up? I'm interested in knowing what payments we're going to get when for the ground lease, and what we're projecting for the project as it has evolved in terms of tax revenue and in what time frame.
So at some risk of misspeaking, we don't have the ground lease before us, so I don't have that summary of the lease payments. If maybe we could get back to that, and I do have slides from prior meetings that just shows that schedule of payments. And we can also call up the fiscal impact analysis. And maybe if we could go to the next question, we could just get back to that so we can get that up on the screen, and then we could walk through that.
Sure, I'll defer to other members of council, but I do want to get back to this. I think that for me, this is like number one. So anyway.
Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. Thank you, Paul and Robin, for the update on this. You're right, we have come kind of a long way, and you guys were definitely have acted in good faith and wanted to be good partners, and I think we wanted to see this partnership succeed, but I still think we have a little ways to go on some things. So I'm going to start with the easy ones first, starting with going backwards on the senior housing. So with the $228,000 per year and then the escalation, what is staff's plan with that? Is that going to go back into the senior housing in this project to provide for units? Or are we going to use it elsewhere to provide for equivalent housing for our seniors?
I see Nancy Vincent, our Director of Housing and Human Services, is on the call. Nancy, do you want to take that question?
Sure. So this cash payment would allow for options. We do have senior residents at assisted living, rather, at Sunrise and at Kensington. This would be the third option. We do have a credit now at Kensington and do have an individual there, and we do have residents who are residing at Sunrise. So it would give those options.
So they wouldn't necessarily have to be used at this building. They could be used at other options in the city. And how many seniors would we be able to provide for at $228,000 a year? What does that translate to in terms of number of residents or households?
That's likely 2.
2.
Yes.
And that's what 6% of the senior building would have also created?
No, it's 6% of the units, so there would be several independent living units. The issue with that, as Mr. Shields eloquently stated, is that it wouldn't allow for a continuum of care. So if we simply took the 6% of independent living units, somebody who needed more significant care as they age would not have that option to stay where they lived. So by having this option, somebody could, even though there's 2 as opposed to 6%, somebody would be able to continue on to assisted living if they needed it, or to the memory care if they needed it.
Got it. 2 is rather disappointing, I have to say, but I will trust staff and our outside consultants' recommendations that this is a fair trade for the 6%. Moving on to the rest of affordable housing. So I appreciate staff's addition of all that really good data in here and helping us decide kind of what mix. I think per my previous feedback, I really don't want us to decide kind of the mix of units willy-nilly, and it really needs to be anchored in data. So I really appreciate that. Given the amount of time we have, which is not much before we have to prove this, I feel like we need more time to actually digest all of the, this is on page 7 and 8, kind of the housing targets of how many units we need by AMI by what date. That's really, really important information that I feel like as a council, we haven't discussed much since the demographic study we did years ago. Wyatt, to the earlier question that the mayor asked, it sounds like we don't have time, though. It sounds like we do need to actually decide on the mix by SESP. So my question is actually for the developer. If the 4% versus 6% is all the same to you all, I assume that 4% is less units, obviously, albeit at deeper AMIs, is equivalent in value for you all as the 6%. Is there some flexibility where we can decide on this a little further down the road?
Hi, we will endeavor to be as flexible as we can. The problem is it's not necessarily all the same to us. There is increased risk with the deeper levels of affordability. And so the investor who we're going to hopefully get on board on this project is going to want to understand what levels of affordability are being offered in the project. So it is something that I think needs to be decided quickly. I would say if the council wanted to perhaps take action on the SESP next Monday, but leave room for the city manager and us to determine the final mix by the end of August, to give yourselves a few more weeks to review. I think we could live with that. But the issue, as I recently said, is that we are going out right now to find that equity investor for the project as well as the lender, and they want to know those things concrete.
Thank you. Hopefully we can have more discussion time, I guess, coming up then, although I know we're about to head into recess as well. So while we're on affordable housing, I think we mentioned this maybe several meetings ago. I think Amazon had just announced kind of their latest grant for transit-oriented development and affordable housing next to them. And I thought that this project in particular could be ripe for that. I think it also requires that developers and not municipalities be the one to apply. So I'm going to actually make the request of Robin and Evan and your partners here, whether there's actually any active requests or plans underway to actually submit for the affordable housing grants.
This is Evan. Are you talking about the WMATA, the partnership with WMATA?
Yes.
Yeah, we have confirmed that that's only for specific WMATA sites. It has to be on a WMATA-owned site, not just within a certain distance of the metro.
Got it. And given that there's obviously less density at the WMATA site adjacent to this one, there's no way to kind of transfer that affordable housing elsewhere?
No, not based upon the conversation we've had with that. We've had conversations with Amazon and WMATA about it, and that's not what Amazon's intent. They've kind of identified 6 specific projects that would be funded by this already.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for looking into it. Moving on to the next one. We've spent less time on this one. In fact, I don't think we actually discussed it recently, but I wanted to make sure I understood it. So one key change identified in the VCs, and this is on line 317, talks about phasing conditions. So as I understand it, when we had the original agreement, we were going to hold back, I think, all of the permits for the last 100,000 of residential until the office and hotel construction were underway. I think the revision now is that we're actually going to only hold back the COs, so further along the construction process until their permits are submitted for hotel and office. So slightly different. I want to understand from staff what the risks are to us, and if that's something that we need to give some thought to.
Yeah, this has been unchanged really now for a number of months, but it was something that was discussed, I think, early on in the council's review of this issue. So there is the question of timing. What the city staff were seeking was to have an absolute link, however, between the residential and the commercial, and we've preserved that link. In other words, certificates of occupancy cannot be issued for the residential until the commercial components are underway. And we've defined underway as with building permits having been under review by for the office and the hotel.
Got it. Obviously, having residents in this development is critical, but I just wanted to make sure that my colleagues noted that phasing change, because I think we were all really happy with the fact that we would have residential plus the commercial components delivered at the same time, and so this phasing is slightly different. Moving on. So I understand from the upcoming items in the staff report that we are close to resolution with the county, and I think we've gotten the payment agreement on the trapezoid lot, so I am appreciative for staff and the Gateway Partners on work on that. One of the key reasons, I think, and those are 2 of the key reasons I think I was holding back my vote at first reading for the changes to the SCE. But that said, I understand from staff there's also still no movement on the ADUs as it relates to condos, which is still disappointing, I think, for all of us who care about this issue a lot. So that's something that is still in the back of my mind as we head into approval for next week. The final item I was going to comment on is around the CDA. I know I had sent some questions to staff around what is the customary makeup of the CDA board. And it sounds like in the articles of incorporation, all 5 members serve at the pleasure of council. But I think in the staff report, we specify that should be a member of council, should be a member of the EDA, and then a developer suggested person as well. I wanted the city attorney to kind of chime in with her assessment of what that means and implications, and whether council still has the freedom to appoint 5 members, whether they are developer suggested or not.
Yes, the list in the staff report was intended to be a suggested initial makeup of the board of the CDA. However, all of the official documents are very clear that council appoints the members of the board of directors of the CDA, and those members serve at their pleasure. So if council does not want to appoint someone who's on that initial list, that is certainly council's option.
Great. And I think for those of you who weren't paying attention to the planning commission discussion, I think about 2 weeks ago, they had a discussion where they cited that was quite unusual. And that, given that future owners and businesses there can petition to the CDA, whether we really need to give a seat at the table to developer. And so that's something I went out and actually did some research on. I looked up our closest CDA, so the Mosaic CDA in Fairfax County actually doesn't have anyone on the development team. I think it's 2 members of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, 2 members of county staff, and I think a citizen appointed who happens to be a member of their Chamber of Commerce. So I thought that was something I would mention here. while we're on the topic of CDA, my last question is also for the city attorney. Carol, can you confirm that after the initial issuance, the CDA needs council's approval for further issuances?
Well, first of all, for the initial issuance, they will need council approval. No bond issuance will be able to be made under the terms of all the documents unless the CDA board has approved it and then council has approved it. For subsequent issuances, there would have to be a whole different procedure because the CDA is created and it's anticipated. The petition from the landowners was for one bond issuance, and that is the expectation of what the CDA would do. And if there was some intent to issue another bonds for something else, there would have to be a whole new process to get that authority, in addition to ultimately having council approve it after the CDA approved it.
So given that they have no future authority and there's still council approval, you don't think we need to cap the CDA's kind of bonding authority right now?
No, and we have not recommended. We've been discussing this with our outside counsel, and we recommend against capping it at this time simply because we're not quite ready to issue the bonds. And so we do not want to have some problem down the road given whatever market conditions are at the time. So that's why we have not put the cap in, and I know that's been suggested. And in fact, the developer has requested a cap to go into the documents, and we have disagreed with that effort. I think the developer will be seeking to keep the costs down for those it's making deals with, but we do not recommend that a cap be placed at this time. I'd also just like to mention that there are certainly CDAs around the country. Again, the makeup of the CDA is something we have discussed with outside counsel, and there are CDAs that are in some ways under more developer control. There are members of a developer certainly appointed to some CDAs, but we certainly have not recommended that. The one representative was being suggested at the outset, but that is not intended to be a slot for the developer or anything like that. But it's not wholly unusual for there to be some representative on a CDA.
Great. I think we'll take that under consideration when council makes its appointments. Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
it for now.
Mr. Duncan?
I would defer at this point if the answer to Mr. Snyder's question has been chased down for display.
Mr. Shields?
Yes, Cindy, if you could put up the staff report and just go to line 1,411, there, you're right at it. So this is where the fiscal impact analysis is summarized, and with the mix of uses that are in the project, which have remained consistent really since the original interim agreement that we've had. That's one thing that the development team and the city have been on the same page on throughout our discussions, is maintaining the strong commercial components to this program. So the net fiscal impact is estimated at a range of $4,964,000 per year to $5,055,000 per year. It is with the relative to the last time you all saw a fiscal impact analysis, it has increased slightly, and that comes naturally with the increase in density that is coming with the project, and the higher value that's been assigned to the project at this point. So that's a summary of the fiscals. They've remained pretty consistent and steady throughout our analysis of this project, so there aren't any real major changes to that. We do estimate in terms of pupil generation for the project that, as always, there's a range in that projection, but we are stating that approximately 66 pupils are projected for phase one, which is a slight change from the previous analysis based on a slight modifications to the unit mix. I'm happy to answer any questions on that. In terms of the overall deal structure, I'd be happy to answer any questions about that if council would like to discuss that as well. But let me pause before going into that for any questions on the fiscal impact analysis.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks a lot. So let's go to the the ground lease payments. Now,
Okay.
the money, the numbers that you've put up are annual, assuming total build out as proposed. So when do these numbers become real? The numbers that you've already put up, the 4.9 to 5.5. What are the assumptions built into that? Because I just want folks to understand the benefit to the city of this project financially. So I'm gonna be as brief as I can, but I want to get these things out. So
this, as is always the case with our fiscal impact analysis, this assumes a stabilized and fully occupied project. So, I think that from the developer's perspective, this probably 2026 is a good stabilization time frame. I think in the comprehensive agreement, that's 2029 in terms of the scheduled performance. That's sort of the outside date for stabilization, if I'm recalling correctly. So this fiscal impact does take years to ramp up, but that 2026 to 2029 period is when we're assuming stabilization.
so let me turn it over to the developer. You use the term stabilization. To the developer, what year should we use?
Well, the one consideration, our model stabilizes in 2025, but we do have the pilot, I want to say through 2028. I don't want to misspeak though, because I don't have that right in front of me. So that is an element. So I think Wyatt's calculation of 2029 is accurate in terms of when the pilot burns off and the city's realizing the full tax revenue of the site.
Pilot stands for payments in lieu of taxes. So, all right, this is going to get more complicated. I know we've got a lot on the agenda tonight, but I really need the finances here laid out very clearly so the public understands what the city can expect and when can it expect it. Now let's go to ground lease payments. And they've been reduced and delayed as a result of developer negotiation against my wishes and frankly against my vote on occasion, but we're here. So where are we right now? What are we going to get and when are we going to get it in terms of cash payments? And I would say that I disagree strongly with a methodology that equates a 99-year payment stream to a payment stream in 5 to 10 years. But let's put that aside. What can we expect when in terms of payments?
So in terms of the major deal terms for the ground lease, the initial payment of $6.5 million has been paid to the city, and that's in the city's coffers. The next payment in the current fiscal year, FY22, is $4.5 million, and that is payable at the outside closing date, which is April 30th. So then from there, on the anniversary of that closing date, there will be a $4.5 million payment each year through 2025. And then in the year 2026, there is a $1 million payment, and then we begin the $200,000 per year ground rent, which then continues on for the 99 years of the lease, escalating at 2.75%. So there are also some profit share provisions, and those include the condo profit participation that is scheduled. Those condo sales are set to occur in FY25 or thereabouts. And another important profit share item is the land lift profit share, and that Ms. Betterell, what, in terms of the land lift, that comes with financing, so that would be done in the current fiscal year, the next 12 months. Would that be accurate?
I believe that's how we worded it. I can't exactly remember the timing of the payment. That's the time point when it would be calculated. And I don't recall the timing of the payment for the CA.
Okay, so Wyatt, I guess, and the developer. Well, to Wyatt, does this payment stream, the way you've defined it and laid it out, is that consistent with our modeling that would eliminate the necessity for tax rate increases to fund the high school?
Yes. So when this was discussed really at length during the winter months when this, when the comprehensive agreement was amended, and we did lay out what the debt service schedule is for the high school, and the revised amendment did cover that debt service, based on our financial modeling, and then the tax yield that then comes on board, which we just spoke of a moment ago about the net fiscal impact. Then as those lease payments cease, the tax yield then takes its place and covers the debt service for the remaining 30 years of the term of that bond.
Okay, perhaps a clear version of that ought to be made available to the public in advance of our final action. I want to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing with this project financially. There's been a lot of focus on the pictures, if you will, and what I want to assure the public is that this project does what we intended it to do from the very beginning financially. One final question, the relationship to the CDA. Is there any danger that what we were expecting as payments from the developer would in essence be bonded by the CDA and so those actual payments aren't made?
No, and I don't quite follow the thread of the concern.
The thread goes like this. We have a CDA that issues bonds. Those bonds, while they don't technically have the full faith and credit of the city, as we've been told, might create at least a political issue for the city down the road if they're defaulted on. So in essence, in a de facto way, not de jure, but in a de facto way, we're taking on a bond obligation, if you will. Does that in any way offset or make less direct the payments to the city, either under the lease or the projected tax revenues from the project once stabilized?
So the answer is no. And, the city does have no obligation for the bonds issued by the CDA. And I think the proper way to view the CDA is that this is a debt taken on by that 10 acres and by the taxpayers of that 10 acres. And it is not a debt that's taken on by the city or by the taxpayers across the city. So that is the essential fact of the CDA. And, I certainly would not agree with anyone who says that the city does take on any liability with the debt issued by the CDA.
Totally agree. But what is funded by the CDA, would that otherwise be coming out of the developers' pockets?
So that's a very good question and an important one, which gets back to the reason why are we considering a CDA, and the rationale for it is that the infrastructure that is being built by the developer in this case is extraordinary. It is more than what a developer typically undertakes for developments, certainly in the city's history. They're building an entire grid of roads. Those roads obviously serve the development, but they'll also serve the school. They'll serve the traveling public. They will have additional routes in addition to Haycock Road in terms of their ways to get to West Falls Church Metro and through that whole corner of the city. They're funding brand new infrastructure. Typically, developers have sewer right there that's available, have water mains right there that's available that they can tap into. None of that exists in the interior of this site, so the CDA will help fund those improvements. And it is important to note that the only thing that the CDA proceeds can be used for is public improvements, improvements that ultimately will come to be owned by the city. And so it's an important thing to understand in terms of how, its purpose, as we consider it.
Hey, thank you very much. Those are the questions I had.
Mr. Duncan, followed by Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The concerns that motivated my recent negative vote were three, so I'd just like to touch on those. Ms. Hardy spoke to all of them, so I don't need to go into great detail. The first is the trapezoid parking lot. What is the cost of getting that parking lot into shape to be used as the schools plan to use it?
So that is something that the schools are still in discussion with Gilbane. And so, I need to defer the answer to that question to the school administration.
Okay, it'd be great if we could have that information by the time we're asked to vote on this next Monday. I believe I heard Robin say that the partners are willing to put 150 to 200,000 in to whatever the cost is. I think 200 sounds like a good starting number, so I hope we can start from there. And if it's much more expensive than that to do the work, well, let's just say let's start with 200. The second is in regards to the composition of the CDA. And thanks to the city attorney for her responses online and tonight. Just reading the language of the staff report, and I understand that in the legal documents, there isn't anything like the language that's in the staff report, and that's good. But the language that's in the staff report, which goes into, fair detail, goes into pretty considerable detail about a proposed composition of the CDA, just seems peculiar to me. If there's no language in the legal documents themselves that speaks to that. And I would, again, as I did, I think last time, ask that we just drop the language about composition of the CDA and let this council and future councils operate under the rubric of the language there that says, it's our call. Without going into extensive detail, what the city attorney said about the interests of the developer in regards to the bonded amount. And by the way, I'm supportive of not having a cap on that. That's exactly why I want to make sure the council, appoints a CDA which has the interests of the full city taxpayers in mind. And I would like to see the language that's in the staff report just dropped out so there's clarity on that. Finally, on the affordable dwelling units, and yes, thanks to staff for coming up with numbers that show us where we hope to be by 2045 in terms of number of affordable dwelling units in the city. And if others have had a chance to run the numbers, and more specifically than I, that's great. I'd be interested to hear it. But just quick back the envelope, it looks to me like we need to be building and opening, something like 100 affordable dwelling units every year for the next 25 years in order to hit the mark that is laid out in the staff chart. That is a eye-popping number. I mean, our council in recent years has been more committed to affordable housing, building on the work of other previous councils, but we've been going great guns to build and buy affordable dwelling units, and I don't think we've ever had a year where we've opened 100 at once. All that to me speaks to 6% at 60 AMI buys us, as I understand from reading the charts, 32 units at the West Falls project, as opposed to 22 units if we go more deeply affordable. I mean, I don't know. I suppose you could look at it, both ways. I mean, 10 units is not that big a difference, I guess. But on the other hand, when you've got to be hitting a number of 100 every year, the difference between 22 and 32 is a significant number. So I guess I'd hope that based on our discussion last week, we had a little more time to discuss this as a matter of policy. But I'll defer to the mayor on what I heard tonight was that we need to actually resolve this by the time we vote next Monday. And if we do, if we must, I would very much like to see us pile up as big a number of affordable dwelling units as we can at 60% AMI, which is, no small feat itself, rather than go the more deeply affordable route with this project, which I think is buying units at pretty high cost per unit. I guess that would be the factual question that would be helpful to know, compared to, say, the money that we're investing at Virginia Village to get the affordable dwelling units we've gotten there. What is the per unit cost there compared to the per unit cost that we're talking about up at West Falls? Okay, that's all I've got. Thanks.
All right, and if I could, there was some misinformation or a difference in information provided to council as to the time we needed to make this decision. I think some of us are hearing something different than we've heard before. Just during the pendency of the next few minutes, could the city attorney just confirm exactly when we need to make a decision? I mean, I know Weiss had told us one thing. I think we had all understood something different from last week. If you have time, city attorney, maybe you could just take a look at that while additional questions continue.
We looked at that question before the meeting tonight, and as drafted, the VCs say that the decision will be made, and then the results of that are contained in the SESP conditions. So if we want to get more time for that, I think what we would need is a revision to the voluntary concessions that would allow for a later decision.
But so what's in the comprehensive agreement? Is it addressed in the comprehensive agreement? Because that's been signed, that's been executed. The voluntary concessions relate to an approval that hasn't occurred yet, correct?
Correct.
So the voluntary concessions, quote, don't need to be amended. They haven't been implemented yet. They may need to be changed.
That's correct, although the proposed ones would have to be different because currently they say that decision is made as part of SESP voluntary concessions. And I don't believe that the comprehensive agreement provides for this option of the 40% or the 60%.
But does the comprehensive agreement, so the comprehensive agreement just says 6% period, right? Is that what you're telling me?
That's correct, 6% at 60 AMI.
Okay. And so the voluntary concessions are what alter that. Although the voluntary concessions, once again, are proposed, they haven't been accepted. The special exception has not been approved. So there are no voluntary concession other than proposed voluntary concessions.
Correct.
Well, the SEE voluntary concessions were approved in 2019. So that's the baseline.
Or is that what you're referring to, Carol? Or are you referring to voluntary concessions associated with this approval?
Well, they both have the same language. And they both say this will be dealt with at the voluntary concessions for the special exception site plan. But right now, they don't really reflect what will happen at the time of, I mean, even the ones for the special exception site plan do not reflect what decision is being made about this 40%, 60%.
All right, let's go on to the additional questions. Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yeah, Wyatt, just to confirm, Ted's blessed those ADU calculations that we're currently using, correct, in terms of market valuation difference?
For the senior cash in lieu?
For
Is that your
the
question?
senior cash in lieu, but also just the ADU calculation.
Oh, yes. He has, run the numbers and views them as comparable.
Okay, on both of those, on both the senior as well as the traditional ADU.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. All right. Robin, on phase 2, have you guys given any thought to the potential there? Has there been any interest, or has that just been put on the back burner given everything that's associated with phase 1?
Just given thought to it generally in terms of what?
I guess generally speaking, are you guys doing any planning around that, having any discussions about future potential, or is that too far off?
No, I mean, we're actively speaking to, particularly in the office. I mean, certainly the residential component, we would not want to accelerate that timeline just to not interfere with the, absorption of our phase 1 residential. But on the office, we definitely continue to talk to anyone who's interested in that component.
Okay.
And would bring it forward if at all possible.
Okay. Just curious to know if there was any interest, how the market's reacting right now. And then a couple questions on fiscals. You guys are obviously involved in the comprehensive plan discussions next door in Fairfax County, and maybe this is a combination question for you all and for staff, but I'm looking at the fiscal calculations, and I think we constantly talk about tinkering with what goes into these fiscal calculations that are usually painted on projects. And I feel like to some degree, we look a few years back and find that we've underestimated because of our assumptions. But again, assumptions are only as good as the inputs that go into them, and those are constantly changing. One question I do have, just looking at the approvals over there at West Falls Church that Fairfax County is making, I forget how many residential units are going up there, but 1,000 plus or something like that. And I'm looking at the fiscal calculation that we have where we're assuming, 50% retail sales. We're just looking kind of our general assumptions. Has there been any analysis to the fiscals taking into consideration the fact that I guess you guys are starting construction on, a pretty significant number of residential units next door that are going to push people over to our site to shop? Has there been any inclusion in that kind of analysis into our fiscals? Has anybody given that any thought?
Let me talk with Becky about that. I don't want to answer out of turn in terms of exactly how the model works. I don't know that number of units adjacent really will push the numbers significantly, but let me talk with Becky and get back with you on that.
Okay. All right.
I will say sort of globally, it's a very good point. And, one thing that the city has, I think, been very steady on is saying we want a lot of commercial activity on our site. And I think, relatively speaking, the Virginia Tech site and the WMATA site, it is the city site that is going to have the dynamism and the most vibrant commercial uses.
Yeah, I know you may not think it moves the needle much, but I think when we're talking about 99 years, that can have a significant impact, especially in a baseline number that we run out over that time period. And so I'd be interested to know, not that we need to bang our head against the wall at this point, but I think to Dave Snyder's point, being fully transparent with the community about, what this means for the fiscals in the city. I always like to refine those as much as possible because I think that it's good news, of course, when we find out that there's a positive benefit to the fiscal projections on a project due to something that's not even being built inside the city limits. And I think that this is one of those cases, especially when construction, I think, is expected to start in 2024. And my next question on fiscals, I know that there are some on this call that obviously know who the grocer is going to be for our site. Have we refined our analysis to take into consideration shopping changes, increase in online shopping, what that means for the fiscals of a supermarket of a specific kind at that project? And I don't think anybody necessarily needs to answer that unless they have a specific answer for it. But depending on the retailer or the grocer that actually goes in, their business format and kind of the changing nature of retail, especially as it relates to grocers, I would also be interested to know if that changes our fiscal assumptions either. Does anybody have any comments around that they want to offer up? It's a very specific question to a very specific issue, but again, it's about, I think, refining our fiscals so we're being as transparent as possible with the community. And then the last thing I'll say, and I know this is on the agenda for later, but Carol, I just want to thank you and staff for your hard work in getting to the bottom of the Fairfax County issue. That was a very sticky situation for a couple months, and I think that consumed far more time than it should have, and it took, I think, considerable effort from just about every staff member and council member on this call. And so I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate you getting that resolved. And again, that was the primary reason that I held back from voting to move this forward until we had that resolved. So I'm very glad that we've come to a ceasefire or an agreement in a more collaborative environment with Fairfax County, and glad to see that pushed across the finish line. So Carol, thank you very much for a tremendous job in working through that. So it's all the comments and questions that I have at this point.
All right. Are there other comments or questions or requests from anyone else on council? So I'll just ask a few then myself. Wyatt, so the 6% of senior, we heard just a few minutes ago that the developer would actually prefer that we provide, or they provide, on-site senior housing as opposed to making a cash contribution. How many units would that be?
I believe that would be 8 units. And,
8 units. So how many?
One thing I do want to just note, when we said 2, that's kind of the assumption being that those are 2 that are taking the most expensive level of service in the building. So I think that should be viewed properly as the worst case scenario, or the lowest case scenario.
Well, I mean, I guess in some ways, though, if you're not going to take the units, you're not going to take the best case scenario, because the best case scenario is on-site units. And so if you decline to take on-site units, then you're basically seeking the full care package, right? Otherwise, you just take the units, wouldn't you?
Well, I will say that it provides the city the flexibility, so they could use that $228,000 to pay for folks to rent in the independent living units if they so chose, and that would actually pay for them to have more than 8 low-income residents in that building, based on the figures that Trammell Crow has shared in terms of what the independent living rents would be. So that's why I offered that it is more of a benefit than building the units.
So, so Wyatt, though, we would get, how many units are in the senior independent living portion, or total on the senior portion?
I don't have that figure at the tip of my tongue. Ms. Betterell, do you have that number? The number of units?
Approximately 200, and it's currently designed as approximately 215 units, 60% of which are independent living. So that's roughly 129 units.
So the 6% applies to all of those units, or just the independent living, Mr. Shields?
Just the independent living.
All right. So at 120, that would be, I guess, what does that come out to? Is that 8 or so? Is that where we get the 8 is from 120?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. I guess I would just say to Mr. Duncan's question or point earlier about trying to get as many on-site units as possible, I generally would agree with that as well. I think too often we build up war chests of money that don't get deployed, or they get deployed in a delayed fashion or inefficient fashion. So I guess I don't feel strongly about it. I certainly want to hear what other people think, but my inclination is to, take the 6% as Phil has suggested, and frankly, take the 6% of the independent units as well in the senior portion. But that's just a general inclination, and certainly like to hear what other people think as well, if anyone wants to opine to that at this time. But that's all I've got as far as either questions or comments. Does anyone want to make a motion regarding the Fairfax County request that Mr. Shields has put before us?
Snyder would move approval of the action regarding Fairfax County.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I miss Hardy on the second.
Can we have it on the screen now? Can we just, Mr. Snyder, can you reference the resolution, the TR number?
Yes, I move approval, move to adopt TR 21-24. And I do have a couple comments, but I move that. Is that sufficient, Madam City Attorney?
Yes, thank you.
All right,
I don't want to mess with your handiwork.
Second.
All right, Ms. Hardy on the second. Before we move to a vote, is there any public comment, Madam Clerk?
Mayor, this is Cindy Mester. There's no public comment.
Okay. Mr. Snyder, you had additional comment?
Sure, just very quickly, we noted after our closed session last week that there was an outline of the proposal. It's on the public record tonight. I think this does remove a significant uncertainty that was a potential cloud over this project. And I think it represents as well, hopefully, a very bright future of working with Fairfax County on this development and other areas of mutual benefit. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comment anyone would like to make? Okay, so let's go to a vote. Ms. Mester, can you handle that?
Certainly will, thank you. This vote is for moving to approve TR 21-24. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Sean Siska?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Thank you, Council. Mayor, that passes 7-0.
All right. Is there any further discussion about this matter anyone would like to have or make? All right. Thank you all for coming out and joining us tonight. There'll be further conversation next week, and hopefully we'll continue to advance this case forward. Let's move on to the next item then, which is TO 21-13, a budget amendment.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'm joined by Kieran Bawa, Finance Director, and she will provide a summary. Let me just note at the outset that what is before the council for discussion tonight at work session is an idea of moving a portion of the ARPA allocation ahead sooner rather than later. It's about 6% of the total allocation. We are in the midst of a deeper strategic discussion on the highest and best uses of the full allocation, and we will seek public input on that as we go forward. We anticipate that those larger decisions will be made in the fall. Council also has asked, however, are there things that are pressing that we need to begin to address now, such as making sure that our schools are able to have in-person learning in a safe and healthy manner, to make sure that some of the critical services that we're providing for the community that we're using CARES dollars for are able to continue, some of the emergency assistance, and also to make sure that the stormwater program is moving forward as expeditiously as possible. So those are sort of thematically some of the things that we've tried to screen through in terms of a vetting process with some recommendations for immediate consideration. We'll summarize those tonight. We look forward to council's input on this. This will be a dialogue of council putting things in or taking things out. And then we would bring, we would anticipate bringing an ordinance before you next week for first reading and then second reading in September, so that we can move those things forward in an accelerated way. So with that introduction, Kieran, do you want to just provide a summary in a bit more detail than I just did? And then we look forward to the council's direction on it.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor Tarter, members of the council. So the item before you, the city has been allocated $18 million in ARPA funding in 2 tranches, of which the first tranche of $9 million was received in June, and the second tranche of the remaining $9 million is anticipated in 12 months in next fiscal year. The city has until December 2024 to encumber the funds and December 2026 to expend the funds. So we have the staff and with council, we have had various discussions on with getting guidance on how to deploy these funds, the ARPA funds. And tonight we have for you an appropriation request of $1 million, which is roughly 6% of the total, leaving a balance of about $16.9 million for future appropriation requests. We are providing on page 2 of the report is a chart that provides our initial proposal, which is very big picture analysis, asking for funding for immediate needs. And we are looking at future items that is going to come after community input for the remaining 94% of the pot of the funding. And the options here include $250,000 for the schools for mental health professionals and testing and vaccinations, $200,000 for stormwater projects, advancing for stormwater projects, about $226,000 for human health and human services needs for rent assistance, and other assistance, immediate emergency assistance for residents. And then there is some funding for public outreach and interpretation assistance to Fairfax County personnel for testing and vaccinations. We are requesting $100,000 for a communication, for public communication through news media, surveys, and other needs, which are all COVID related. There is some funding for technology, for improvements for further video conferencing as we move on. And Public Works, we are requesting $160,000 for that, for $100,000 of which is for speed signs on residential streets for reduction in speed from 25 to 20 miles per hour, and $60,000 for facility improvements and maintenance of certain things that would help improve touchless features and overall over in the city facilities. I do want to underscore the fact that we are looking at the U.S. Treasury guidance that has been provided. And also, as we get more and more clearance from U.S. Treasury on various questions that have been turned into them, to make sure that all the projects that are going to be that we're going to expend these funds on meet the compliance and the eligibility criteria. And this is at a proposal level that we have from you, so that funding is in place and work can start, since this ordinance takes two hearings. This is pretty much a gist of the ARPA funding. A couple of the other things that I would like to note, unless you want to go for ARPA questions first and visit the other stuff later, but it's pretty straightforward, the other stuff. There are donations and grants that we are requesting appropriation for. Of note is funding for Tinner Hill mural of $20,000, which requires use of fund balance under spending from the fiscal year 2021s. That's not ARPA. And then there is funding request for a couple of capital improvement projects, as stated on page 4 and 5 of the report. $473,000 for multimodal connectivity program, $1.38 million for the NVTA 70% funds to establish a new multi-use path to better connect the W&OD trail with the West Falls Church Metro Rail Station, and then $1.67 for the downtown POA program. That wraps up the report that I wanted to share with you, and we're happy to address any questions you may have.
All right, so I think the Vice Mayor and I need to make a disclosure. I don't know if the Vice Mayor had her hand up for that purpose, but I'm going to let her speak right now, and if not, I'm going to make a disclosure as well. Vice Mayor Conley? I think you're muted, Vice Mayor Conley.
Sorry, hold on.
I make the following statement before City Council's discussion of TO 21-13, an amendment to the FY22 General Fund budget. I am an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right, I make a similar disclosure. I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of TO 21-13, an amendment to the FY 2022 budget. My wife's an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by this matter. I can, however, participate in it fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. All right, let's move on to questions or comments. I don't know if you had any, Vice Mayor Conley. If not, I'll go to Ms. Hardy.
I did have a question.
All right, go
We
for
could
it.
go back to the ARPA funding. Thanks, Ms. Bawa. Okay. The 4th one there says public communication through news publications, surveys, and digital displays of public health information. Can you just give a little more description of what that entails? And then my second question is related to the street sign, the speed signs from 25 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour. The CACT earlier said they were studying that. Are we doing that? We know we're going to do that? Or are we still studying that?
So first question on the communications. It is a broad range of items for communication, but one that I do want to note is that one of the intentions is to use the local Falls Church News press more actively and on a more regular basis to get public health and other public information out. And we currently don't have the budget for that or the resources for that. And so this would be a way to try to address that along with other strategies as well. With respect to the speed signs, what this appropriation would allow us to do is to move that forward. And there is some study that is required by law, I believe, before we can make this change. And there's also a legal review that needs to happen. The largest share of this money, however, is for the actual purchase of signs to switch out from 25 miles per hour to 20 miles per hour. What is intended in this is that this would be on residential streets, and there would be a category of residential streets where we make sort of a blanket change so it would be predictable for the public. That's the thought process. We do have some policy work, however, we need to do, as you know, it's not just a question of ordering the signs. There's also obviously the council needs to approve it with a good engineering and legal basis. But this is a good, if the council were to approve this, this would give us the funds to move forward. And if it was the council's decision to do it, then we could immediately execute it.
Okay. And then I really like the first item, the last part of the first item, implementing SNAP at the farmers market. That has been on to-do lists for a long time, so that would be great if we could to make that happen. That's all for now. Thanks.
All right, Ms. Hiscott.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions specifically on the financial and grant administration and the mental health professionals. Are those both staff members? So this is a one-time request from ARPA dollars for temporary staff or project-based staff that would help with managing all this grant and then working on mental health within the schools? Or is this taking an expense and adding on staff member that we would then incorporate into the budget going forward?
Let me defer the grants management to Ms. Bawa or to Ms. Mester, and then I'll address the schools.
Sure. So the financial and grant administration is to get temporary help to administer the eligibility, compliance, and drawing down of all these funds and making sure all invoicing is done. And that is going to be very specific to this project only, and may not even be full-time person, but temporary. And when the funding is gone, that person will not be required.
The regulations and compliance and reporting is quite significant with these grants, and the frequency of reporting, which is appropriate because of the amount of the federal money, but it is an additional task for the city to undertake. Our auditor.
I was just wondering if that isn't enough to handle having this job through 2026, which is essentially when we need to have it all encumbered, right? So you're hiring someone to help manage the process through then.
This was just the initial allocation and estimate, wasn't it, Ms. Bala?
Yes, this is an initial allocation to get us started and see how much funding we're going to require. I didn't want to estimate just for all the 4 years. The initial time can take a little bit more effort as we keep getting some updates on the Treasury requirements and eligibility criteria that they've been giving us and clarifications, and hopefully a year into this, things might become a little bit more systematic. So we'll request appropriation as we go along, but this is for the initial.
And then on the schools, Wyatt, you said you were going to address mental health professionals.
Yes, just briefly. So one, this request, it will be familiar to council. It came up during the CARES allocation discussion, and we had asked the schools if they would defer the CARES request, that this is more appropriate for ARPA dollars. I will just note that the school staff have been part of our staff strategic workout sessions on the use of ARPA dollars. We still have, I think, more work to do on that, but I did want to just note that the schools have been part of that discussion. And the last thing I would say about it is I think that the view of staff in bringing this one forward is we don't want to be in a position where if the schools did have a need that, if cases go up and they had emergency needs in order to do what they needed to do, we did want to have some money available to address concerns, particularly as we get into the, school starting up in the fall, et cetera. So I think we probably need to have more discussion with the schools, but this would be an initial allocation.
And then assume that if we don't use the allocation or we need more, that this is just a constant ebb and flow and amended to the allocation of dollars. So if we didn't use $100,000 for public outreach, for instance, you would come back to us during this process and say, we've used 50, we're done with that part, we're going to use that 50, and we request reallocation to more mental health professionals or whatever the case may be. That's how we'll move forward with these requests, right?
Yes, we will provide regular reporting so the council knows our drawdown on these dollar amounts, how these dollars are being used, and if we're not using them, so they can be repurposed.
Okay, that's it for now. Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Thanks to Ms. Hiscott for flagging those two mental health professionals and financial and grant administration positions. I would express some concern that those would become structurally embedded in, at least on the school side, because mental health issues are considerable and not related simply to COVID. And, we've been asked about that in at least the last budget cycle and maybe even before that. So if that's an ongoing need, then I think we need to just be careful about setting things up for 2026 or 7 that eventually are going to have to be taxpayer funded. If there's a need for them, let's meet the need, with today's dollars. My question, good news about the public communications component of the COVID response. This is where I put my plug in for whatever more we can do to encourage vaccinations. I mean, I think advertisements in the newspaper are always a good thing, but I would like us to consider some sort of payment for vaccinations until we get our number up to something that's more respectable. Either an ambassador program to encourage people to get vaccines or just direct payments. I think the president suggested that localities might look at that, and I hope that we would look at that. so that we can get our 60% fully vaccinated number up to 75% at least in the near future. The other question I had related not to the CARES money, but just to the Department of Public Safety emergency management moving into the East Wing. If I knew about that, I missed it. I just wondered if the manager could speak to that a little bit. That's a reasonably significant movement of personnel, and just wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah, the Office of Emergency Management, which is led by Joe Carter, and it's a small shop, has been reporting to the city manager for over a year, but still being budgeted within the police department. And so what we're bringing to council is we could discuss this more publicly, which I'm glad you noted it and highlighted it. The real purpose is OEM is something that I think it needs that citywide span of control that you can get through the city manager's office in a way that you don't naturally get when you're in the police department. And discussing it with the chief, with the HR director, and with Joe, that is a change that we're recommending. And to do emergency management planning in particular well, you rely on so many staff to contribute to that planning effort, and it does go more smoothly when the city manager makes it a priority and there's that direct line of control.
Okay, thanks for that response. Going back just briefly, the speed signs, I mean, I'm as much as anybody in favor of trying to slow speeds on neighborhood streets. Obviously, where I live, speeding is always an issue on West Street. I'm not wildly optimistic that just trading out 25-mile-an-hour speed limit signs for 20-mile-an-hour signs is going to be anything other than an enforcement, burden. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, but I know this train's leaving the station here, so I would just ask if we would consider that money be allocated to signs that are either solar powered, lit up, the signs that seem most effective, at least in capturing the attention of people driving by, are the ones that, actively display your speed as you go by them, and you can see, oh my gosh, I'm going, 35 miles an hour instead of 25 miles an hour. And to me, those sorts of signs are more useful than just another sign that's on a pole somewhere in the dark on a residential street that says 20 instead of 25. So that's my 2 cents on that. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. So I generally support all of these items. I think they generally make sense. For the first couple items that are related to kind of COVID recovery, how much of this might be duplicated with the state's allocations when they come out of their special session?
If I could defer that to our expert, Cindy Mester. And Cindy's been doing just an awesome job of tracking this and all the statewide movements. Cindy?
Thank you, Mr. Shields and Ms. Hardy, for the question. As you know, the General Assembly started today, and just late this afternoon, I did share the presentations that were made that were nice summaries for the bills that are before the Senate and the House. For the things that we're proposing, let me start with the assistance to residents for food and so forth. Those items will not duplicate the states because they have different eligibility. So these are for folks that wouldn't reach the state's eligibility criteria or just local transportation that the state's not provided. So those would not be duplicate efforts. The state does have a large amount in the proposed budget to help with rental assistance, eviction, prevention, food, and so forth, and we would still tap into that as we are currently now for a lot of our tenants and utility assistance. The public outreach piece, we are seeing that the governor is going to put money into beefing up the Virginia Department of Health and therefore some of the districts in terms of IT and messaging and data and targeted outreach. But we do know that there's just that local on the street level that we need here to support Fairfax County personnel, but also where we could have translators or interpretation that we can do some targeted outreach ourselves. So that second one tied to the third one for communication will be to enhance and collaborate with the state in Fairfax Health District, but not intended to duplicate.
Great. I know the tricky thing is obviously following what's going to come out of the state and making sure that we fund the things that the state isn't funding to make sure our dollars go further. So thank you for working hard at tracking that.
On the, if I could add just real quickly, the same would be for the schools. You'll see we don't have facility school ventilation in our list. It is in the general government, General Assembly's proposed budget. It will be challenging to see how it comes out because it does have a student population calculation and it requires a 1-for-1 match. So that one is one that once we see how it plays out with the state and what other ARPA and RISA money the schools get, we may need to supplement if we need to do school ventilation. Once again, collaboration versus duplication.
Terrific. On the public communication and outreach, I think Mr. Snyder's always said that that's always half of crisis management. So I'm glad that we're investing dollars against it. I do want to make sure that we are tailoring that communication. I feel like a broken record on this. So rather than just mass kind of communication to the general public, let's make sure we really use the data. So for example, I had shared the latest from the Virginia Department of Health on our vaccination statistics. And if we believe that is all correct, our straggling population is between the ages of 25 to 34. For example, I'm not sure what the reader statistics are for the news press, but I imagine that we may not be reaching those people with news press ads. So we may want to think more creatively about how to actually go out to perhaps our multifamily dwellings to reach a lot of that younger population, or even considering Phil's idea of paying people if we think that would incent people to get vaccinated. So again, communication important, but I would encourage staff to continue to use the data and think about more targeted approaches to reach the vaccination hesitant. I did want to actually go to murals, so not ARPA funding, but is that the lone item, Ms. Bawa, that is funded out of, I guess, reserves?
That's correct, Ms. Hardy. That is the only item that we're bringing forward for funding because of the timing to use the year-end projected underspending. We will bring a complete plan at the fourth quarter report, which is projected to be brought to council by September and early October.
And that timing doesn't work with the murals? Because I actually drove by today and I saw one mural is actually already up.
I'll let Mr. Shields address.
So the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation has raised to date $20,000, and that is being used, a portion of that's been used for the new mural that is at the bike club. There is an additional mural that they have underway that is more ambitious and has an out-of-town artist, and that is the one that would more than use the money that they've raised so far. So that, I think, is the reason why they have brought this request forward to the City Council now, and that's why we've conveyed it for discussion for the council now.
Got it. And I guess as the liaison to the Arts and Humanities Council, so I absolutely support public art and wanted to wholeheartedly support this. I do have reservations about doing this kind of somewhat off cycle, albeit 20,000 is honestly not a huge amount of money. I think the recommendation from the city manager was to allocate this to the Arts and Humanities Council as we normally do typically for arts grants. Is that correct?
I do, and I'd be happy to go into some of the reasons why, but that is the recommendation, yes.
Okay. And is that what's in the staff report right now, or doesn't go into detail on how we would administer it?
Because it is an arts grant, it would naturally go to the Arts and Humanities Council through that normal process, unless the council directed it otherwise.
Okay. I think I'd be fine with that. Thank you for going into more detail on that one. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. I think this is a pretty good list. I want to go back to the fundamental issue of testing, public outreach, availability of vaccines, and preparation in the schools. Is this the amount of money we need to set aside at this point, or do we need more? I want to make sure that even as we address a wide range of things, that we have absolutely adequate funding to the extent that is knowable for the fundamentals of getting out of this pandemic and getting people back to work.
So we believe that this funding is a bridge to the bigger strategic decisions that the council will make in the fall. I will note, however, that one area that is not in this list is the issue of direct assistance to businesses, and that is because we believe we have some serious policy issues to work out before we have a program for, if there is going to be another round of that. And so that's one example of one that we thought about but did not put in this list.
Okay, understand that my focus is to get through the pandemic once and for all, so we don't have to assist businesses, but understand that. And I do fully support moving forward on reducing the speed limit and in putting things in place as rapidly as we can to make that happen. So I'm pretty happy with this. Also happy with the larger context that the vast majority of the funding will be for longer term capital type needs that really the whole thing gives us a rare opportunity to do that, recognizing at the same time that we're pursuing various equity related issues. So thank you.
Mr. Shields, where is the stormwater here? Is it? It doesn't seem self-evident to me. Farther down?
Well, it's listed just below the chart. So the allocation here is for $200,000. And again, that is really just kind of seed money to a larger strategic discussion. We do anticipate, because stormwater is a specifically allowable use of ARPA dollars, that stormwater is going to factor largely in our strategy as we think about the big picture this fall, and that follows out of the council's direction and your discussion of it just several weeks ago. But this would allow us to advance the engineering work. We would hire an additional project manager who would be able to basically double the speed with which we'll be implementing the Big Six projects that were recommended by the Stormwater Task Force, as well as that's the main focus of what that $200,000 would be used for.
Are there other projects other than the Big Six? I know we've talked about this, little things that can be done. Have the little things all been done, or are there more little things that could be done?
Well, so a couple of the ones that are high profile, like the connection to improve the drainage between Poplar and Laura, that's funded, and we have one last signature on a temporary easement to get done, and that project will be full steam ahead. The Wrench Branch project, that's funded. That's a pretty significant one that will be happening right there at the near Van Buren Street, tying into 4 Mile Run there. There are other small projects that, in addition to the Big Six, that I think these dollars will allow us to approach. Our intent is to try to get the ones that have already been agreed upon underway. We do have the green infrastructure that the Stormwater Task Force has prioritized, so that would be next. And I think that between those two, that's a lot of projects, and that'll be our initial focus.
I mean, it seems to me that we really get a lot of bang for the buck for little cleanup projects, whether they're sidewalks, bike trails, connections, moving of telephone poles, whatever it is, stormwater projects, that this is really ideal for. It'll pay dividends for many years. It reduces the borrowing we have to do, and it has an immediate impact in people's lives. And so I would encourage you to continue with these kind of projects as well. I think they're very important. Ms. Mester, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. Sort of following along on Ms. Hardy's earlier comments about how does the state money play into this, I wanted to pick up on public health and then the stormwater that you were just speaking of. So starting with the stormwater, in the state's proposed budget, they have a significant amount of money of their ARPA money going for projects that would include on the sewer and some systems repair and replacement. And for SLAF, our stormwater local assistance funded programs, they're showing $2.6 million of surplus and agency balances that they'll put into the budget that we could access and leverage our ARPA money to minimize, as you indicated, the impact on our debt, but have a large impact on our infrastructure in the community. So been working with Mr. Bradley to coordinate our local expenditures and prioritization on ARPA money tied to the states that was just released. And on the Department of Health front, and as it relates to vaccine and targeted outreach, the Commonwealth has proposed $20 million to provide targeted community outreach regarding COVID vaccines to hard-to-reach communities. So we'll be tracking also how that gets deployed to collaborate and maximize our dollars. And this Thursday, I have another one of our statewide meetings where Craig Pfeiffer is regularly joining us now. And as you know, he is the state and local government liaison to the governor so that we can facilitate those discussions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, are there any other questions or comments about this matter? If not, I would suggest we take a break, which we have not done over the past 2 hours and a half or so, and then reconvene in 5 minutes and finish up our business. Any objection to a 5-minute break and reconvene at 10:05? All right, let's do it. We will take a short break and be back at 10:05.
Thank you, Mayor. And I will confirm for the mayor and council, we are back live for audio and video when you're ready, Mayor.
I'm ready.
It is up and FCC TV is good.
All right, so let's get back at it. We have reconvened. We're back in session after a short recess, a short break, and we're now on to future consent items. Mr. Shields, do you want to talk briefly about those?
I will just very briefly. The first is the approval of a license agreement with Nova Parks. And this is really just a maintenance agreement for the street crossings on the WNOD trail. As the council may recall, the WNOD is an old railroad right-of-way, which railroad right-of-ways take primacy over almost everything in this world, including city streets. So that's what that will accomplish. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any, then, and then we'll move to the next one.
All right, why don't you move to the next one?
If there aren't any questions, we are joined by Mr. Dan Goldfarb with the NVTC, and he's been long suffering. I want to thank him for staying with us through this meeting. We have a memorandum of agreement between the city and the NVTC regarding the coordination of technical analysis, testing, funding, and administration for the next phases of the bus rapid transit project.
Well, I tell you, I just want to apologize again. I frankly had forgotten that you're with us at this point. I don't know why, but I thought this is going to get handled earlier on. So my apologies to you, Mr. Goldfarb, for having you wait so long and to sit through so long of our hearings. So we are happy that you are with us. And next time you come, I promise we'll put you on at the start so you can head back home to your family. So anyway, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sticking around. And we look forward to hearing more about Bus Rapid Transit. So welcome.
Thank you. I'll try to walk through this kind of as quick as I can and answer the questions that are most important for you tonight. So next slide, please. So just a quick reminder what this project is and what we're asking you to help be part of is connecting Tysons with Alexandria. And this is a key part of this goes through the City of Falls Church. Next slide, please. So I've come here before with this slide, and just to remind you that, you know, what's really driving this project is Tysons, the development of Tysons, which as we look out into the future will have as many jobs in the CB as compared to CBD, central business districts in Houston and even Seattle. So next slide, please. If we kind of look at population growth, the corridor was broken up to several large districts, and the Falls Church district is like the greater Falls Church, and this was agreed to in the context of the study at the time, but we've kind of made some marks there to what the actual population within Falls Church City is, and then how that bigger district is represented. But you can see that there's in the corridor about a 34% growth in population. And next slide, please. You see that balances with about a 36% growth in jobs. So we have a lot of growth going on in this corridor from today into the year 2040. Next slide, please. So really what we're looking at here is working with the jurisdictions along the corridor, Fairfax County, City of Falls Church, Alexandria, and the Arlington County, to really make better connections, better choices, more efficiency in the corridor, and to move more people with less vehicles. Next slide, please. What's really important is that out of the phase 2 analysis came the work that said kind of at the macro level and down to the forecast that said BRT is right for the corridor, connecting Tysons to Mark Center is right for the corridor, and most important is connecting East Falls Church, leaving Route 7 to make that connection into East Falls Church in Arlington County. And that's really the travel shed in the corridor. That's the connection point that has the most riders in terms of boardings and alignings within the whole corridor. Next slide, please. And this is all part of a greater BRT network that's envisioned for Northern Virginia potentially. And this network you could find as part of the NVTA transaction plan. It's represented there. But I really think, just in my personal experience with transit in the region, that this is the most important corridor for transit in the region, really connecting a growing Tysons to Alexandria, and this kind of, instead of a radial trip within to the core, the circumventual connection is really important for the region. Next slide, please. So we finished phase 3, and I've talked to you about that before, and I just want to stress that, and it's really working this way, that it's providing guidance to all of the jurisdictions in the corridor and giving everyone, as they plan more and develop more, an idea of what is required in the corridor to really help BRT grow. Next slide, please. But to highlight some of the stuff that's in that report that's really useful, and I think that you would find it useful even at your level as elected officials, is a lot of data that will be used in further studies, like identifying cultural resources, identifying approved projects within the corridor. Next slide, please. Looking at the forecasted ridership, and then looking at a whole bunch of different population segmentations and how they fit into the corridor. Next slide, please. Now, where the conceptual engineering study laid out areas to put stations, it also presented a template of how stations could look given different alignments, different speeds on the roadway, and other things that would pertain to station areas. So we have a whole set of templates for jurisdictions to understand what's going on. And then next slide, please. We also show how it fits into the corridor at kind of a 10% design. So if we go to the next slide, you can actually see what the design is for the City of Falls Church, which is a business access, a bus access, or BAT. I think it's business access and transit lane. Sorry, forgive me for that. It's getting late. My acronyms are mixing up in my head. But what that allows is that for the far right lane would be for the BRT, and vehicles could enter that lane if they needed to access the businesses along that lane or make a right-hand turn. And that was laid out that because the development in Falls Church is there, where in other parts of the corridor, for instance, in Tysons, they're redefining what Route 7 looks like, and there's a lot of flexibility to kind of shape the street around a BRT. So next slide, please. So what I really would like to stress tonight is that we're going to be starting what we call the phase 4 analysis of the bus rapid transit. And the goal of this is really to look at the mobility benefits in the corridor, or really to make the case for why BRT is beneficial to the corridor and to make it to the residents of the, in this case, the city. We'll be looking at a micro level at the section of the BRT that falls within Falls Church and goes to Seven Corners. But in the macro level, we'll be looking at from Seven Corners all the way to Tysons. And we will be really reaching out to the city and working with staff to engage with the public on this. We've estimated about 20 to 25% of the budget in the upcoming project for public outreach at the beginning of the project and at the end of the project. And it's a fixed price contract, so that lets the firms that bid on this kind of move the money around to where they think it could best be served, given the goals and objectives of the study. And within the study, we do have a technical advisory committee, which is made up of each of the representatives of the jurisdiction. And they've started with us from developing the scope, reviewing the scope, all the way up to this month. They get to read, I think it's about 10 RFPs, 10 proposals I got on Friday. So I'll be a very popular person in August for sending people to the beach with reading material. But we're really excited about getting this study kicked off at the, towards the end of this month and into the fall. And next slide, please. Where we're going to update the ridership estimates with the newest regional travel model. And for the first time, we'll develop traffic forecasts. So we'll really be looking at the traffic impacts as well as the benefits of moving people more efficiently through the corridor. And then the last slide that I'll put up this evening is just that, to understand how we asked the jurisdictions to contribute to the project was we put in for a DRPT technical assistance grant, which covered half of the money, and then the jurisdictions covered the other half of the money. And we used kind of like a user benefits fee, similar to how FTA used to look at New Starts projects. And I think what's interesting is that even though Arlington really has the smallest part of the corridor within their jurisdiction, they get a lot of benefits from the transfers at East Falls Church. And therefore, they were asked to pay what one might think is a high share given the small amount of actual facility that will be in there. And of course, Fairfax County, where most of the facility is located and they occur most of the benefits, is contributing the greatest amount to the project. But this is really, I think, an important project for the city of Falls Church in giving it connections not only farther out to the north, kind of to Tyson's, but also into Alexandria and Mark Center and down to the Van Doren Metro. So I kind of went through that quickly in order to kind of respect everyone's time tonight, but I'm happy to answer questions here, or you can always contact me at the commission, and I'm always happy to respond to requests. So.
All right, well, Mr. Snyder is our resident transportation guru. I'm going to ask him to give us his thoughts and comments and any questions he might have.
Well, thank you for that much undeserved introduction. So a couple things on this project. The interesting thing is the proposed route is east, as I understand it, you would, starting east, you would go down 7 and then down Roosevelt to East Falls Church, and then up to Washington and out to 7. So the first way to look at this from a Falls Church standpoint is we're tying in the East Falls Church Metro Station right into the middle of our business district. So the benefits, it seems to me, to our businesses are large in that regard. Secondly, we're of course tying everything west, including Tyson's Corner, to West Falls Church. And I know we've got some details to work out in connection with that. But that would also bring people potentially to our development site that we've just spent a lot of time on tonight. Also, the configuration, it's important that I think this study recognizes that our use of 7 within the city is different than 7 outside of the city. And so you would maximize all of the uses that are essential for Route 7, but also provide what would service would be 10-minute headways, for example. So you're really going to have a situation where we're much better linked to both the East and West Falls Church stations than we are today, with all kinds of opportunities to support businesses, to bring people to our businesses, to get our people out around the region without having to get into their cars. And finally, of course, the environmental benefits from this are very substantial, as well as the equity and the other benefits throughout the corridor. So for me, it remains an exciting project. We need to make sure we get it right for the City of Falls Church, but it's something that's positive in the large scale, and I think very potentially positive for the City of Falls Church, for our businesses as well as our citizens. So a lot of work yet to do on this, but it's a pretty exciting project. And I do believe that it has the strong support of Fairfax County, has strong support of Alexandria and Arlington as well. And this is a great opportunity to work with them on something that's mutually beneficial. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Other questions or comments? I'll ask one. So it may not have gotten to this level of detail, but are you familiar with our new development? I guess you are, having sat through the past 2.5 hours of Falls Church City Council meeting. But specifically, as you may know and probably know, at the West Falls Church Metro Station on the city side, we're talking about 10 acres of fairly high density development adjacent to Virginia Tech that may ultimately have some fairly high density development and some new educational facilities. Also abutting the West Falls Church WMATA station, which will have probably some moderate density multifamily and townhouses. But the BRT, is it planned to stop at 7 or go all the way into the metro station at this point?
So at this point, it's planned that the new development would have a new kind of connection. At least that's what we've seen, which would be about a quarter mile from the station to the actual BRT point. So at this point, it's not planned to go into the station because of the time it would take to divert. We wrote up a little bit of that for staff. But I will say that BRT is flexible. It's not like we're putting down rails. So as things develop and service planning happens, there's always flexibility for certain times to divert into a station or certain routes to start at a station and go into the BRT. So I think that's one plus of BRT. And you can see that an example if you looked at Montgomery County's Flash, where their service planning had lots of different options of routes aligning and stuff like that. So I would say at this point, we're kind of still a flexible level, but we have looked at the travel time differences of going into the station or staying on the BRT and allowing connections at West Falls Church where there's half the headway for each train.
I got to say, just for my 2 cents, for whatever it's worth, and probably not a whole lot, I would strongly recommend you actually do the final last mile, the last quarter mile. So much of mass transit, there's just a massive capital investment to get someone, and then that last, 500 yards, you just can't do it. And then people don't ride it because they don't want to walk in 94-degree heat a quarter mile. I mean, who the hell wants to walk, that far if you're elderly or if you're infirm or you're anything in that kind of heat or cold weather? And so I think you'll find after all the effort that's going to go in to build massive projects like this with stations along the way and dedicated lanes and the like, that if you just don't take it to the finish line, you're going to miss out on riders that you would otherwise get. And so I would encourage you to try to find a way to get this to connect all the way up to the station. It just seems to me like a missed opportunity. It seems like so many mass transit, things we do are just close but no cigar. And so I would just suggest to you that you give additional consideration to that. I'm not a transportation planner or guru. I just know what a pain it is to walk a quarter mile in a business suit in the rain, So anyway, just my 2 cents, but I'd certainly like to hear what others think. And if there's anyone who has any additional thoughts or comments they'd like to make, you're welcome to make them now, and I'll recognize you if anyone else has anything. All right, well, it sounds like I'm the final word on this, but I want to thank you once again, and also once again apologize for keeping you here so long. But you're doing some very good work, and as Mr. Snyder said, I think there's a lot of great benefits to the city. I think that jog to the East Falls Church Metro, as Dave said, avoids our historic areas, but also picks up metro riders and takes them where we want them to go in our commercial corridor and commercial core. So there's a lot to be said for this, and we look forward to its implementation. So thank you once again.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and present this evening. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, let's move on to the next item, Mr. Shields. Looks like we got 2 more consented items.
We do. The first is on an annual basis, the city approves performance contract between the city and the Fairfax, between the city and our Fairfax Falls Church Community Services Board. And so this would be that annual update. And then the last item on consent is an update to our policy for electronic participation by city council members in council meetings. And City Attorney McCoskey has been the lead on this, so I would defer any questions to her.
All right, so 2 additional consent agenda items. Are there any questions or comments about either? These will be on the agenda next week as consent items. An electronic meeting, I think we've discussed mayor's meetings and the like previously, but any questions or comments on either? All right, let's move on to council schedule and comments. Any general council comments, requests, updates? Mr. Duncan?
I guess this relates to the previous item, but Any guess or hunch? I suppose it's difficult to guess in the current fluid environment about when we would decide about going back to in-building meetings.
I mean, what our operating assumption is that we will begin doing so on September 13th when the City Council returns after the summer recess. But that's a decision for council to make, but that's what staff is planning for.
Phil, you're either muted or muttering. I don't know which it is, but
I'm sorry.
Your mouse
right in the middle of when Wyatt answered my question, my signal dropped out, so I missed the substance of what he said.
He said when we come back from recess. It's the 13th, but again, that's subject to our own, the what happens with COVID and what our comfort level is and our community's comfort level. So I think we can be continuing to have that conversation, but staff's planning to return on the 13th, as I think we've discussed at some of the mayor's meetings. But if there are concerns or COVID gets worse, Delta variant and the like causes additional pause, I think certainly that's something we need to take into account for.
Okay, thanks for the repeat. I'm sorry. I see Letty has her hand up, but I wondered, in preparation for Colin Brody to visit us next week, I wonder again if we have an answer to the question of how many federal vaccines we should get credit for here in the city of Falls Church. I see the data is still counting that as an asterisk at the bottom of the chart, and I just wonder, is it, a few dozen, several hundred, as many as 1,000? I mean, in a jurisdiction as small as ours, that would be a useful thing to know if it's knowable.
I know it's knowable. Go ahead, Mr. Shields.
Well, Mayor, you may actually have better information. I was going to provide kind of the way that I've been looking at it, but if you've got better data, please share that.
I don't have better data. I mean, I've been on a number of calls and the question's been asked, and basically the notion always is that it's coming, that it's being worked on and the like, but I have yet to hear any concrete numbers. But clearly there are a significant amount of people who have gotten vaccinated through their places of employment, such as the military, federal agencies, federal security, and federal police and the like. But to my knowledge, at this point, it's unclear an exact number. But Mr. Shields, maybe you know better.
So the number that I've seen is approximately 5% of the vaccinations in Virginia have been handled by the federal government as the employer. And so if that were translated into the Falls Church situation, that would be about 600. You'd add about 600 to our numbers. That's a very approximate way to handle it. But that's just one rule of thumb. I don't know whether we would have more than the state average or less than the state average, but I think it's probably reasonable to think that we'd probably have more than the state average.
Okay, that's good. That's a start. So I had the chart up on the other screen, but so if you add 600 to our number, what percentage fully vaccinated does that get us up to?
So fully, and so this is not scientific, obviously, but so that would put us at 65% of the total population is fully vaccinated. 76% of the adult population is fully vaccinated.
And when we say total population, that includes children under 12 who are not even eligible yet to be vaccinated. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So the 76% of adult population, does that include only 18 and up, or does that include 12 to 18, the 12 to 18 cohort being able to be vaccinated, right? Am I right about that?
You are correct, but that 76% would be strictly 18 and older.
Okay. So we're somewhere of the people who are eligible for a vaccine here in the city, that is everyone who's 12 or over, we're somewhere between 65 and 70%, maybe.
I believe NVRC is the only organization in the region that reports eligible population, so 12 and up. So Virginia reports 18 and up, and total population Fairfax Health reports something different, but I think I saw NVRC reports eligible population, if we want to go look there.
Letty's been trying to school me on this for like a month, and it's
just different denominators.
It's inconceivable to me that we have gotten this far in and cannot have just one set of data that everybody agrees on. But sorry, I go on. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. Two things. One, as it relates to the CDA that we had lots of discussion on, I think we've only received one application, maybe two. And so I think we made a recommendation to extend the advertising for that so we get more applicants. So for anyone who's still watching at 10:30 at night, we would welcome members of the public to apply for that. Wyatt and Carol, are we okay with seating the CDA in September as opposed to August?
I think that we will recommend that you go ahead and we seat the CDA, perhaps with an additional staff member who could then resign as soon as we get a citizen person. But that's something that can be discussed. But if we want to get everything done on the 9th in order to get the CDA started, it might be good to get it started with another member who would drop out as soon as we get a citizen resident person appointed.
Okay.
And so, one point of information for the council, and we can provide a bit more on this in writing, but one of the reasons for forming it and letting them meet in August is so that they can pass a refunding resolution so that the expenses incurred by the city, legal, financial, and otherwise, can be paid for by the bonds. That's the thing that we've been, is kind of on the critical path to get done. And so we'll provide a bit more information on that for the council, just so you understand that schedule.
Got it. Not to diminish the role of the other four members of CDA, but I do feel like having obviously a resident seated is important to me. Moving on to the meeting next week. So in preparation for the health department joining us, I guess a couple things related to what Phil raised. One is I think we have that outstanding question on whether we have authority to mandate vaccinations for employees. Wyatt, is that something we'll be prepared to discuss next week?
So the Mr. Brody will be, I think, informed on that. However, that is mostly going to be driven by, in terms of the study that's happening from Fairfax County that we're watching, is more in the HR department of Fairfax County, more so than in the health department. And so some of the key policy issues will be, yes, it is a mandate, but what are the exceptions? And I have been thinking that it would be wise for the city to watch how Fairfax County navigates that and some of the conclusions they come to. I do think it would be good for the region to do it in a as well a coordinated way as possible. And so right now we're just tracking that Fairfax County study.
Got it. Speaking of regional coordination, along the same lines is our indoor mask guidance. So with the CDC's latest guidance on monitoring kind of what your local jurisdiction's level of transmission is, if you haven't checked the CDC's map, Falls Church is kind of in this little island right now. So I think it's Arlington, Alexandria, Prince William, and Loudoun are all at substantial or higher transmission, which is the threshold that the CDC recommends re-implementing an indoor mask guidance. Falls Church is still low. I want to say Fairfax is at moderate. So I guess I have a hunch that it's coming. I think it would make sense for us to be prepared and then have a plan on some sort of consistent mask guidance between city, schools, activities, that sort of thing for indoors.
That's something we're also looking at and trying to track very closely. This is one where I do think it would be good to follow Fairfax County Health's guidance on this. I'll just share with the council in our own internal deliberations, we have very strong opinions about this in various different quarters. And so I think what I would like to do is just follow the health department's guidance on it and go from there. Obviously, we can exercise our own judgment on it. And right now, our guidance to staff is that it's encouraged And out in the public areas, it is required for staff. We are not yet requiring it for the public who's entering into the building.
I think the timing of this may be around when school is resuming, so it would be good to be consistent with the school policy as well, because I think in general it just makes sense when things are similar. I think the schools are going to likely require indoor masks for everybody, regardless of vaccination status, right? That's it. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions before we adjourn? Any last words from anyone? All right. I think we got through a lot tonight. And so I'm going to just ask if anyone would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. We're adjourned. Everyone have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
All right. Good night.
Thank you,
Take care.
Council. Stay
Council.
safe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.